If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. What is the creepiest, most unexplainable, or eeriest paranormal encounter you've ever had that still keeps you up at night? I get insomnia. It was one of those nights, and I was sitting out on my back porch at about 4 a.m. smoking a cigarette. It was one of those eerie nights where there was absolutely no breeze, and it was just completely quiet out. We have woods behind our house, and as I was sitting there, I saw this person making his way through the canopy of the trees, like jumping from tree to tree, 30 or 40 feet up in the air. I was absolutely stunned and just sat there dumbly, too afraid and confused to even get up and run inside the house. This person or thing, or whatever it was, stops directly behind my house and looks at me. At this point it's about 50 feet away and maybe 40 feet up in the air. It pauses for about 5 seconds, staring in my direction. I'm absolutely certain that it wasn't an animal. Its body was human-shaped, and it definitely wasn't a raccoon, bear, or any of the other things people have suggested it might have been. But the way it was moving through the trees definitely was not human. No human, I don't care how adroit they were, could move like that. It was too dark to make out much detail of the face, clothing, or anything like that. After about 5 seconds of looking at me, it turns away and takes off the same way it had been going before, just leaping from tree to tree at a rapid pace. In a few more seconds, it was out of sight. When I was about 10 years old, my cousin and I used to go to a house behind my grandma's house during the day. It was an old abandoned house. We could never figure out a way to get in, and we'd usually get called back over before we could even figure out how to get into the house. One night we snuck out with some flashlights and tried getting into the house. We decided to break a window and get in that way. The first thing we noticed was a ton of what seemed to be old Polaroid pictures on the floor. Don't recall exactly what was on them since at this point I was pretty terrified. Shortly after we stumbled into the bathroom, and to this day this image is burned into my memory. There was a ton of pigeon feathers on the floor, and there were dead pigeons and loads of blood in the bathtub. I had never been terrified in my life. I really wish I knew what had been going on in there and stayed longer to investigate further. That house has since been demolished, and they built a new house on that land. This incident occurred just tonight. I was on my way home from band practice, and my drummer drove me home. We were talking about singing and vocals and giving each other constructive criticism, helping each other out, and whatnot. We turned onto a street right before my home street so he could drive straight out on the main road instead of going through my whole neighborhood, and as he turned the corner onto the middle road that connects both of these streets, there was a dude walking on the side of the road dressed in a long black cloak. And mind you, it's almost midnight, and nobody was on the roads at all. And as we pass, this guy looks me straight in the eyes with an angry expression. And I tell my drummer to speed it up a bit because that made me highly uncomfortable, so he starts driving a bit faster. He then glanced in his rearview mirror and said the dude was walking towards us. We both had a suspicion about this dude but didn't know what to think of it. We just assumed this dude had bad intentions. So I quickly grabbed my gear and my guitars out of the back of his truck, and as I'm closing the hatch and cap, I swiftly looked behind me to realize this dude was already within 20 to 25 feet of me and was walking fast. In a hurry, I grab my guitars, my drummer speeds off, and I get the duck out of the road and run towards my garage/makeshift studio. I drop my guitars inside and realize I forgot some gear up by my front porch, so I grab my pocket knife just in case this dude was hostile and sneak up to the front of my house. I got to the porch and grabbed the rest of my gear with my knife in hand, and it seemed he disappeared, didn't know where, didn't care, but God, that was ducking creepy. I had a bizarre experience as a kid. So when I was a kid, the house I was living in was really strange. My house is a couple blocks away from the cemetery, so it's only a 10-minute walking distance away. I wonder if that has something to do with the experience I had. Anyways, people living in my house also experienced weird things, but I can say that as a kid I was always terrified sleeping at night. I remember sometimes I would wake up and find myself on the floor awake in front of my parents' bedroom door, or I would find myself awake in front of the bathroom. Looking back now, that's just really creepy. I was a sleepwalker as a kid, so that could explain it. During some nights I would wake up and hear classical music playing, like piano music. I thought it was my parents still awake watching a movie or something. So being a kid, I would naturally just go to them when I couldn't sleep. I walked out of my room, following the sound of music. As I passed the kitchen, I saw the living room. In front of me, I could see a blue light coming from that room. I thought, oh, my parents must be there. As soon as I entered the room, the music stopped, and the blue light was not there. As I'm writing this, I'm just getting chills about how odd that was. I remember just being like, this is weird, but I didn't feel scared. So then I just walked back into my room, climbed back in bed, and went back to sleep. This actually happened a couple of times as a kid. Sometimes I would follow the music downstairs alone. Thinking back, following the music downstairs is the most stupid thing I could do because that's just effing creepy. I have plenty more stories, but this one stood out to me. Anyways, I wonder if you guys experienced anything strange as a kid too? Do you have any insight into what I might have been going through as a child? My grandfather used to take me camping and hunting with him in Arkansas, in the forest just outside of the Ouachita National Forest, and I distinctly remember one night, lying down after we'd let the campfire gutter out, we were just talking back and forth, and all of a sudden he made that eent noise that meant shut your mouth now. Usually it meant he'd spotted game. So I immediately clammed up and started listening and straining to see what had gotten his attention. A few moments later, I saw a black, man-shaped figure walking through the treetops. The tree limbs didn't bend or even move, and neither did the leaves, but this black, man-shaped figure. It didn't even really walk, it sauntered. And it almost skipped from tree to tree. It moved as if it carried no weight. I remember being scared and whispering, "Grandpa, what is?" And he very quietly said, "Don't you dare call it to you." Shh. So I shut up and watched it while it almost frolicked back and forth through the treetops. There is no way those tree limbs could have supported the weight of something that tall without bending or even creaking. I asked my grandfather about it the next day, and he said, "I've been hunting and sleeping in these hills for most of my life, and I've seen that damn thing since I was a kid. Most people round here have. Never heard of anyone ever talking to it. But I've known plenty who came out here and never got home. I have no clue what that thing was." So this happened a few years ago. I'm not a full believer in the paranormal, though I find it fascinating and fun to hear other people's stories. I've had a few experiences, but most of them I can maybe explain away. However, this specific day I have absolutely no explanation for. I was in my mom's house with my husband, younger sister, my mom, and her boyfriend. It's a small house, so you could hear people talking no matter where you were. My husband and I were in the living room facing the hallway. To the left were the bedrooms, and to the right was the kitchen. Then suddenly in the quiet we hear my sister yell, "Mom." She spoke in a sarcastic tone, as if she was upset about something. She talked like this all the time, so it was so clearly her. It came from the left like she was in her room. My husband and I look at each other wondering what was wrong, and that's when my sister walks out from the kitchen, and I say, "Hey, did you just yell for Mom?" And she goes, "No?" And my husband and I must have said it all because I could see her panic set in. I started crying because no one had said a single word, yet we both heard it so clearly. The TVs were off, and it was only me and my husband that heard it. They often had weird experiences in that house. My sister's door would always pop open and slam shut randomly. We assumed it was airflow, everything strange always came from her room. It was just the fact that I heard her voice and her sarcastic tone so loud and clear when she wasn't even in that area. So yeah. I never forgot that day, and we still talk about it all the time. I always found that house intimidating. This one's a true story from a family friend. So some years ago, my family friend's sister unfortunately passed away. This sister's name was Angela, and after some years of battling depression, she finally took her own life by jumping from the balcony of her apartment building. Soon after, my family friend gave birth to her daughter, Angie, who she named after her late sister to honor her. She was apparently very, very close to this sister. According to the story, around the age of 4 or 5, when toddlers begin to speak and fully develop their personalities, little Angie began to develop a vivid imagination, which culminated in the creation of her imaginary friend, Casey. According to our family friend, her daughter Angie did everything with this imaginary friend over a span of maybe just 5 or 6 months. Every day she was heard talking to Casey, playing house with her, watching movies with her, and whispering to her at night when it was bedtime. Apparently, Casey began to form her own opinions. At times, Angie would rush to her mother to express disappointment when Casey didn't join them at Angie's playtime tea parties. Alternatively, she would express Casey's perceived frustration when Casey felt ignored by our mom's family friend. Of course, our family friend always viewed this imaginary friend, Casey, as her toddler's way of interacting and communicating with her, and she'd grown pretty accustomed to it. You know, typical kid stuff. But it wasn't until one day when our family friend was sitting on her bedroom floor, sitting among stacks of photos, that she had begun to organize. She had started to organize various piles of all her family members' things. They were a huge family of 9 siblings, and eventually, Angie tumbled her way into the bedroom where her mom was, babbling her typical toddler ramblings. but the toddler suddenly grew extremely excited when she saw the photo pile of her deceased aunt, Angela. She squealed while pointing at the pile. "Mom, I didn't know you had all these photos of Casey. When did you take these?" Our family friend was, of course, shocked and confused, not believing what her child just said. "No, honey. These are pictures of your Aunt Angela. She passed away before you were born." "No, Mommy, this is Casey. Don't be silly. See? She's right here." She then proceeds to point at the doorway. Now, I can't remember the events that took place after that incident entirely. I do know that our family friend began crying after this event and that she was extremely freaked out by what had happened, but apparently her daughter Angie eventually grew out of this imaginary friend stage a few months later and doesn't remember any of this today. She's around 21 years old now. Toddlers, man. True creepy encounter. So this happened to me today. I am a 24-year-old female, and I live in North Carolina. The place I live is very well known for human trafficking. I was in the parking lot of TJ Maxx, and I must mention that this TJ Maxx is known for creepy people lingering around, people randomly getting placed $50 bills on their vehicles, things like that. As I was getting ready to go inside to grab just one item, makeup remover to be exact. And as I was about to get out of my car, a very sketchy white van with no company logo or anything like that pulled up 2 spots away from me to the left. I noticed the people inside didn't seem to be any type of construction workers or anything. Something in me told me to not get out of the car and to drive away. So as I did that, I noticed they had no license plate. Alarms literally started going off in my head. I parked further away from the store, in front of a Lowe's Foods grocery store, and was going to go inside TJ Maxx from that area of the parking lot instead and just have to walk a bit further than where I was originally parked. Well, as I was about to go inside, the same thing happened. A creepy white van, identical to the first one, pulled up directly next to me on the right. I know this was a different van because I could still see the first van I encountered sitting in the same exact spot. The men in this second van were staring directly at me. I immediately booked it out of there. I am so glad I didn't get out of my car, and to those who are probably thinking, did you call the police? My best friend works for the police department here in town and told me she would mention it to the officers there, so hopefully they will contact me. Anyways, please always stay safe and be aware of your surroundings, just like I did. I was driving down a dark back road with zero light aside from my headlights when I was 16. In the middle of joking and being teenagers, my best friend told me to watch for this box in the road. What I saw was a box slowly inching across the road. Now, this was a night with no wind in the PNW. There was clearly something in the box. I approached slowly, thinking maybe a raccoon or cat was stuck under the box and needed help. As I'm pulling alongside it, my friend starts getting a little freaked out. I look at him, the car is stopped now, and I'm like, chill, dude, we can free it, and he starts begging me to drive. I look over it, and I see that it's not a box at all. It's just a piece of cardboard, stood up on end, just inching towards our car slowly. We were right next to it, so there were no strings pulling it, and there was no wind, so it couldn't be that. It took a second to register that what I was seeing wasn't normal, and once it did, I drove so fast out of there. To this day I have no ducking clue what the duck that was. I live in a rural US state. My family had us kids doing chores at pretty young ages, so by the time I was 8, I had to mow the lawn every so often. We have about 1.5 acres we had to mow, but we also had a riding mower, so it wasn't as bad as you'd think. It's also important to know that our house is surrounded by corn and bean fields, except for one side that is a fairly good-sized patch of timber. One particular day when I was a lazy preteen, I didn't go out to mow all day, but my parents wouldn't let me wait until the next day, so I had to do it at night. I was finishing up mowing the bit of land furthest from the house and closest to the woods when I heard someone shout, "Hey!" At first I thought it was my dad coming to tell me to hurry up, so I slow down and turn off the blades. But when I look up, I don't see my dad. That's when I hear the voice again. "You! Come here!" This time I realized that the voice was coming from the woods. Nope. I ducking hightail it back to the house and run inside. Screaming to my dad that there's someone in the woods. It was owned by a company, and there shouldn't be anyone in there. Let alone anyone there at that time of night. He jumps off the couch and grabs a gun and flashlight. My mom turns off the lights in the house so that we can see out better, also so whoever it was can't see in. We watch my dad head into the woods, and eventually we lose sight of the flashlight. We wait what was probably 30 seconds but seemed like hours, and eventually we watch a figure come towards the house. Mom turns on the outside light, and it's Dad. When he comes inside, I ask who it was, and without looking at me, He very quietly says, "No one. Go to bed." Years went by, and we never talked about it. A few years ago I was drinking with him and asked if he remembered that night and what was out there. He took a sip of his whiskey, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Don't you ever bring that night up again." And that was it. He didn't talk much for the rest of the evening. I'll never know who or what was beckoning me into the woods. Very strange happenings. Several years ago, when I was in my late 20s, I rented a house with my girlfriend, I'm a lesbian, and my sister. There were several unexplainable and strange occurrences during the 2 years we lived there, but I'll stick to the first one that happened to me. Our bedroom was in the middle of a long hallway, and we often slept with the door open so our dog could go in and out during the night. There was a light usually left on at the end of the hallway, so there was always a dim light shining into the bedroom. One night around 2 a.m. I woke up, which was not unusual for me at the time. I lay there as I contemplated getting up to go to the bathroom and spent a few moments waking up fully. Suddenly, I saw a man standing at the foot of the bed, in the shadows. I was so terrified, I froze. Even in the semi-dark, I could make out his features clearly, medium height, kind of stocky. He had dark, thick hair cut kind of short and wore dark pants and a white t-shirt. He had a large nose and thin lips, and his eyes were dark. His overall presence seemed very menacing, though that could have come from my own terror at waking up to find someone in my room. He turned and started walking around the foot of the bed, up the side nearest me. As he got a little closer, he was walking further into the light from the hallway and just suddenly disappeared. I didn't mention this incident to either my GF or my sister, as I figured they would just assume I was having an extremely vivid dream. At the time, and even until today, I've never doubted I saw a spirit that night. A few months later I got even more confirmation. My sister's 3-year-old son was staying the weekend with us, and as they were going to bed in her room, which shares a wall with our room, he suddenly threw himself against his mom, buried his face in her shoulder, and asked, "Who is that man that walked through the wall?" He was frightened for some time, and being so young, it was difficult for his mom to get much info from him except that he saw a strange man walk from their room, through the wall, into what was my room. Like I said, there were a lot more things that happened. This was just the first and, for me, the most vivid and unexplainable. Living in a small sleepy area in the middle of a forest, I've had many unexplained odd experiences here. So for some added context, I live in the middle of a forest, like I mentioned, but actually along the side of a small mountain. Unless you're on the horse trails, which are at the top of the mountain, not near me, the woods are almost impossible to navigate as the hills are extremely steep and full of thorn bushes. We hear our dogs going nuts in the backyard, so my mom goes and checks, and a young man has hopped our backyard fence and is jogging through the middle of our yard not wearing a shirt and I think shoeless too. The house directly behind ours had a terrible fire. The family left all their belongings besides the essentials there and never came back afterwards. This man ran from that direction. I later went and checked, there were no signs of entry in the house, and the police had boarded the front door up. So, this stranger, standing in my backyard, asks my mom where _church is and asks if he can cut through the house. My mom, kind of in shock, lets him, and he goes to the front door casually and asks my mom for directions. She tells him, and this man nods at her and starts jogging back in the woods, in the vague direction of the church, which was about 2 miles away. But here's where it gets odder. A week or so later, I see in the newspaper that this young man was seen on the side of the road, about 25 miles away from our house, outside his car, shirtless and shoeless, and seemed very dazed and confused, staring up at the sky. When someone pulled over to help him, the man immediately ran straight into the woods. This happened 2 or so years ago, and he's still missing despite extensive searches. Never did any drugs, was a pretty well-liked member of the community, and on a sports team here. They have no idea what happened and why he did this. My mother had told me about a strange dream. I was in a mansion, and the closer I got to the cellar, the deeper her sense of dread had become, something evil and dangerous just out of reach. I woke up feeling so strange, I almost called you to see if you were alright, but it was 4 a.m. We chuckled about her weird little psychic feelings and moved on. A few months later I was hiking with a friend, and we came upon an old abandoned farm. It was cool and just a tiny bit creepy in that abandoned farm way, but on a nice sunny day it was mostly just cool. The farmhouse was huge and boarded up, and being the kind of folks we were, we broke in. Inside was a time capsule. Everything looked as though the inhabitants left suddenly sometime in the 60s. There was still an old tube of Colgate and prescription drug bottles in a bathroom, made, but dusty and somewhat rotten, beds in the rooms, magazines on side tables. As we worked our way back, the elements and animals had made more progress, the floors softer and walls more crumbly, until I got to the large service kitchen where the floor started to look actively dangerous, some boards flexing ominously underfoot. I tread very carefully. Still, I felt compelled to explore. Dishes and mouse-invaded food containers in the cupboards. An old junk drawer full of vintage crap. I turned to my friend to show him something and realized he wasn't there. When had we split up? What room was he in? I called his name, and then noticed one of the doors, open, stairs leading to the basement, like a black mouth. I said his name again, and my voice seemed to echo back from that void. Cold, musty basement air felt like it was blowing at me, and I felt the creeping edge of uneasy fear, alone, with no sound of a friend, odd anxiety about those dark stairs. I turned back to the way I'd come in, calling my friend's name, and eventually found him in a side study, looking at old books. "We should go," he said. "I'm starting to feel uneasy." "Me too." We made a careful exit and headed back. On returning to cell phone service, I had multiple missed calls from Mom. "Are you okay?" she asked. I had one of those mom moments. I just got really worried. "Everything okay?" "Sure," I told her. We were coming back from a hike, and we'd found a cool old house. I started to describe it. "Oh wow," she said. And then she started to ask specific questions. Was there a red dining room with broken glass cabinets? A floral bedroom with a huge 4-poster bed? An old white enamel cook stove in the kitchen? She was describing the house, 2,500 miles away from her. "That's the mansion from that dream I told you about." "Is it a sprawling old farmhouse?" "Yes." And then she started crying. "Oh geez, I'm sorry, this is so crazy. I saw that house. Oh, you can't ever go back there. I'm feeling that dread again. That cellar. There's something awful in that cellar. Please promise me you're okay." She was nearly hysterical, describing that cellar door I'd seen, the stairs leading to blackness, the rotten floor of the kitchen. I had to promise her we wouldn't go exploring there again, which was easy. I felt cold and tingly, deeply sad at the sound of my mom, who was overwhelmed by her weird premonition. I felt overwhelmed. I'm a diehard skeptic, but she described the abandoned house I was just in a part of the country she'd never been to. My friend was thoroughly unnerved too. That's what was creeping me out. I was starting to hear noises from down there. I had just moved into a tiny town that was literally in the middle of nowhere and had fewer than 100 people in its total population. I was about 7 at the time, and I had overheard my parents talking about a dog that kept barking all night long, keeping them up. I wanted to help them, so I went out looking for neighbors with dogs to ask if they could maybe keep their dogs from barking all night. So this particular town had a terrible track record of houses catching on fire, so there were a lot of old, half-burned, or ruined houses that had just been left to the earth. This particular incident happened with one of these ruined houses. As I'm walking around, I hear someone call out to me, and I turn to see a very beautifully kept lawn in front of a lovely white 2-story house. There is a nice old couple sitting in lawn chairs out front, and the woman is calling me over. I walk over to the fence. The woman asks me what I'm doing walking around by myself. I had been living there for about 6 months at that point, so I knew everyone, and it wasn't that weird for parents to let their kids out by themselves. I tell them about the dog and ask if they know about it. The woman says that it is her dog, and she will try and keep it quiet from now on, and then offers me a full-size Snickers bar. I took it. I know you're not supposed to take candy from strangers, but there was a fence, and also, like I said, it was a very small town, and I wasn't really afraid of anything happening. Feeling like I had accomplished my goal, I went home. At the time I really wanted to eat the Snickers, but it had melted on my walk back some, so I stuck it in the freezer to chill. Then my friend comes over, and we head over to her house, and I forgot about the candy. Wondering how the ruined houses fit into this? Well, when I return home from my friend's house, I tell my mom about the nice couple and that they would keep their dog quiet. I tell her where the house was, and she gets really confused. "What do you mean? There isn't a house there." I would have shown the candy as evidence, but I had totally forgotten about it. After some back and forth, we agree to go on a walk tomorrow in the daytime so I can show her which house I mean. The next day we walked down to where the house was, and there is no house. The well-kept lawn was just overgrown weeds, and the house was nothing more than a pile of rubble. Only the fence still remained. I ran home to show her the candy that I had just remembered, and that was gone too. Disclaimer, my little brother was known for stealing things, so he might have taken it, but still. I still get chills when I pass by that vacant lot to this day, and I am now 20 years old. In October 2018, I had an encounter while out walking at night with 3 friends. This took place in Northern Virginia at about 9 p.m. while we were walking on a path near some houses and trees. As we were walking down the path, one of my friends kept on looking back because he was creeped out due to the location. I lived close to this area, so I was relatively used to walking through this specific path, but the others lived a little further away and never walked there. My friend, who was scared, kept on insisting that we go to the main road and walk on the sidewalk instead. The path we were taking had plenty of lights, so it wasn't like it was pitch black. It was actually probably more visible than the sidewalk on the main road. Once we got near a tunnel that would take us to the next neighborhood, my scaredy friend screamed that there was something behind us and began to run up the hill that led to the main road. None of us believed him at first until we turned around to look. When the rest of us looked back, we all saw a tall white figure walking slowly in our direction. We all followed our other friend up the hill and kept on running until we came to a lit parking lot near other buildings. At the time, I didn't know what that thing was. All I could remember was that it was tall, and I couldn't see any arms on it. It was also bright white. It had a weird stride to it, as if it was taking long steps to avoid specific spots on the ground. It wasn't until I watched the famous Fresno nightcrawlers videos that I finally realized what I may have seen that night. The creature's gait was perfectly accurate. The long legs and lack of arms were exactly what I saw. It also appeared out of nowhere because my friend was constantly looking behind us and didn't see anything at first. I don't know what this creature or thing can be classified as, but I am 100% sure that they are real. I always regret not taking a video or picture of it, but this thing really scared the hell out of us, and we all just wanted to get out of there. Honestly, the thought of capturing this thing on camera was not on my mind at all until I got back home. Feel free to ask any questions, I'll be glad to answer them if I can. One night in October last year, at about 3 a.m., I couldn't sleep, so I went to the little forest area behind my apartment complex off a highway in Yukon, Oklahoma. I was listening to music on low volume, just hanging out, sitting on a piece of stone, looking out into a field in front of me. Directly to my right is a dead tree, followed by a line of trees following a small creek. I begin to zone out a bit and get this eerie sense of a presence amongst what otherwise is a quiet and empty forest. I don't pay much attention to it at first, but some time passes, and I still feel it, so I kind of focus on it. Once my concentration begins to drift in curiosity to this odd feeling, I hear, about 60 to 70 feet past the dead tree to my right, footsteps of someone approaching. It gets about 25 feet from me, and I focus on it giving off a defensive vibe towards it, and it stops. I slow my breathing to listen, and it walks off, suddenly silent again, as if it stopped about 60 feet from me again. A few minutes later, it's walking towards me again and stops at the dead tree about 15 feet from me. I hear it slowly moving through the brush, and it begins tapping on the dead tree. I look to my astonishment to find there is nothing there but a strange aura and feeling of cold flushing over me as the tapping continues, and I begin to feel as though it's checking to see if I notice it, and I look directly at it. At this point, it's certain I notice it, and it gets right next to me, just staring at me. Out of nowhere it sprints dead at me, and I feel as though a hole is in my heart. I jump up and yell, and it jumps back, and we stare at each other. I can't see it, but I can feel its cold presence standing there. I moved around a second, and it began frantically moving through the brush like it was surprised I didn't just let it jump, what felt like, into my body. I decided to put distance between us, and after a few seconds, I go back to my apartment. I can see the little clearing from my window, and for the rest of the night I could feel it staring into my window, and I'm just staring back in pure astonishment that this wraith-like invisible entity just so openly tried to invade what is pretty much my vessel, my body. After that night, I never saw the entity again. The end. The point is, I am 100% sure this experience took place. It was very real. The paranormal is just another part of our reality. Death and life go hand in hand. Be careful, not foolish. I lived on this acreage for a few years when I was 9 or 14 years old. The time I lived there was the worst part of my childhood. There was just bad energy, and weird things happened out there. Animals were always just dying for no reason. I'd find cats dead outside but not eaten or anything like a coyote got them, but lying on their backs with their eyes and mouths wide open looking scared. But that's not what my unexplainable experience was. It was that I'd always see in the corner of my eye what I thought looked like outlines of people. That's how I described it in my mind. I never said anything about it, though. It really scared me because as a kid I had this weird fear of the concept of spirits, and I thought these things were spirits. I remember seeing those things, and when I'd look at them, they'd look as though they were quickly running or moving away. One particular time I recall so well was when I was sitting on the living room couch and there was a staircase up to a loft to my left. I saw one of the outlines standing there, and I quickly looked and saw it go up the stairs around the wall at the top of the loft. I looked back at the TV but was paying attention to where I saw it in my peripheral vision, and I swear I saw the outline peek around the wall at me. As I got older, I started to rationalize my memories of it as maybe I was having a mild mental breakdown at the time because I was highly stressed since my dad died before we moved there. It was a big change in my life. Once I moved away, all the weirdness stopped, though. Then one day, many years later, when I was in my early 20s, I and Mom were talking about that place, and she casually said, "Your brother thought there were aliens out there. He would see shapes in the corner of his eye." I immediately, without even thinking, said, "They weren't aliens, they were spirits." I asked my brother, and yeah, we both saw the exact same thing. We never talked about it because we both were scared at the time. I was like 7 or 8 years old, and my mom had just tucked me into bed. I fell asleep, then I woke up sometime later to my mom's voice saying, "Time for bed. Want me to tuck you in?" I was confused by this, given that she had already tucked me in. I don't think I responded, because I was sleepy, but then something slapped me across the face really hard. I woke up, looked around, and nothing was there. Weird. Obviously that freaked me out, so I hid under the covers and tried to go back to sleep. I was shaking, and I had that feeling like someone else was in the room with me, standing right behind me, even though no one was there. After a minute I got slapped again, 2 or 3 more times. This was even more confusing given that I was under the blanket, so what the duck could be slapping me? And why did it have my mom's voice? I was pretty freaked out, as you can imagine. I lay there in fear for what felt like an hour, unable to sleep, then finally I got the courage to get out of bed and go to my mom's room to find out if the voice I heard was really her. She was asleep, and when I woke her up and told her what happened, she had no idea what I was talking about. It was not her who came into my room, she was asleep the whole time. I don't know if it was paranormal or not, maybe it was sleep paralysis or something. I definitely experienced that as a child. But I know I felt pretty awake after being slapped in the ducking face, so I'm not sure. If it was just the one slap that startled me awake, I would say it was probably just a dream. But the repeated slaps after I woke up make me doubt that. The memory of this event has always stuck with me quite vividly, and the details of the story have never changed. Personally, I don't think it was sleep paralysis because I know what that feels like, but I really have no idea if it was paranormal or not. I've heard similar stories, and people are very quick to attribute experiences like that to demons, but I don't believe in that kind of thing. I'm not sure I even believe in ghosts, all I know is that experience scared the shit out of me and I don't have a convincing explanation for it. There were a lot of other weird things that happened in that house, but that experience was by far the most extreme. I have a pretty weird one. Around 2011, I was 19 and newly married to someone in the Navy. His first duty station was Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. It was such a great house, right on base. Full garage, kitchen, separate laundry room, 2 bed, 2 bath. Beautiful. My husband worked a lot of late nights and would regularly be gone for the bulk of them, which added to my general discomfort there. That house was crazy. I would get a little creeped out there by myself. The first experience was when I was upstairs in the bathroom washing my face. The bathroom was at the top of the stairs, directly to the right, next to our bedroom. I was washing my face one evening while my husband was home. He came walking up the stairs pretty slowly and then stood right at the doorway to the bathroom just saying nothing. I was in the middle of scrubbing my eyes, so I just said, "What?" And he didn't respond, so I washed the soap off my eyes quickly and glanced up to see no one there. I yelled his name, and he called down from the living room, "Yeah?" That nearly made me pee my pants, but it's just the precursor to this next part. One night I had this strange dream. I dreamt that I was running up the stairs as fast as I could. I ran past the bathroom and through the open door to our bedroom. As soon as I reached the bedroom door, I woke in my bed, completely startled. I was lying on my side, facing the bedroom door. I always kept a night light on in the closet because I was such a scaredy cat, so the room was very lightly illuminated. When I woke up from the dream, I saw that in the doorway to the bedroom there was a jet black blob that was nearly the size of the entire doorway, like what you might call an orb. But it wasn't. It was oblong shaped and irregular. It was like a cloud, and it faded fast, but it faded in on itself, like shrinking into a little ball until it disappeared completely. It was there and gone within 10 seconds. The way it shrunk, though, was just odd. The edges of the blob were pixelated, and it was like the pixels from the edges just pixelated out. That's how it shrank. It wasn't a dream, though. I sat awake for a minute wondering what the heck that was until I just closed my eyes again. I told my husband about the incident, and he really tried to talk me out of it and didn't want to even discuss it. That is until a few months later. Nothing much happened after the event, and life just continued on as normal and quiet. One day, out of nowhere, my husband just decided to tell me that he actually had seen something too. He worked odd hours, so he was usually in bed way before me but was a light sleeper. He said he woke up one night because I had come in the room getting ready for bed. He said he saw what looked like a black orb right next to me as I dressed, and he said the edges of that orb were pixelated too. I would love to know what could have been. When I was around 12, my friend and I saw something that I could never explain. If someone told me they saw this, I wouldn't believe them, but I know what I saw. The house I grew up in was on the corner of a city street. The way the house was situated, from my bedroom windows looking out, I had two large ones side by side. You could see the street and the entire side of the house across from us. A guy friend of mine lived on the second floor of that house, and he and his family were gone for the weekend. My friend and I were in my room playing Nintendo, and I was sitting on my bed facing the windows. It was evening, but it must not have been later than 6 or 7 because my friend wouldn't have been over too late. It was her turn playing, and I'm watching the screen, but something catches my eye, and I look out of my window and see something in the friend who is gone for the weekend's home. I kid you not, it looked like what you would describe a Yeti to be. It was white, as tall as the ceiling, and covered in hair. I frantically told my friend to look, and she paused the game and immediately saw the same thing. We got down on the floor and crawled to my window to watch this thing. It was destroying the house. Like breaking chairs, breaking dishes, ripping up the sofa, etc. I remember asking my friend if she was seeing what I was seeing, and she confirmed that she was. We watched this thing for a few minutes and then kind of started diverting our attention to each other in like a oh my god what the duck way, and when we eventually looked back, it was gone. We both kind of seemed to instinctively know that this was something that should stay between us. It wasn't discussed, but the vibe was there. In order to get home, she would have to walk past that house, so she had her dad pick her up. I tried my best to sleep, but I kept waking up and looking out to see if I saw it again, but I didn't. The next day, I was sitting outside my house waiting for the friend who lived in the house to come home. I felt I needed to be there when they eventually came running out of their destroyed home so that I could try to explain what we saw the night before. They pulled up sometime in the afternoon, and I hid behind my door in some kind of fear. Like, I knew this was going to be bad, and I was scared to be a part of it. I watched them go inside, and I wait. And wait. And nothing. Eventually, the friend and his dad come out to get luggage from the car and look as nonchalant as you can be. At this point, I'm confused. The house was destroyed. We saw it happen. I go across the street to my friend, and he greets me. I'm kind of like, what's up? Everything cool? And he starts talking to me about something, and it hits me that the house is fine. Everything was as they left it. At this point I'm so confused because I know what I saw, and I have a witness. Later on, the friend who witnessed this event and I talk, and neither of us can understand what the duck happened. But life just kind of moves on. It wasn't until I was an adult and I read about so-called glitches in the Matrix that I started to think there might be an explanation for what I saw. Some poor prehistoric creature got whirled into a house, freaked the duck out, and then glitched back, returning everything to its normal state. I mean, yeah, it sounds ducking crazy, but I racked my brain for decades trying to come up with something more based in reality, and I just can't land on anything. I've only told 2 people what we saw that night, my mom and my husband. They neither outright say I'm lying, because they know me and know I'm not someone who tells stories, but they don't seem to enthusiastically believe me either. I get it. They probably think I saw something that they can logically explain, but I swear, unless you saw it, it's impossible to know how real it was. Sorry if this is a jumble, I tried to make it as concise as possible. This is a scary true story set in the Arizona desert. Let me preface this by saying I'm not claiming this was any particular phenomenon. I am telling you what happened exactly how it happened. No exaggeration or lying of any kind. On to what happened. 20 years ago, my older brother and I, 19 and 15 at the time, were working a landscaping job in northern Oz. We had gotten off work at the site around 7 p.m., hopped into his truck, and started the 45-minute commute home. On the way back, there is a dirt road that leads about 20 miles into the middle of the desert. It's there mainly to take dirt bikes out or go four-wheeling, etc., but we would use it as a good spot to stop and smoke weed while avoiding prying eyes. So we drive a few miles in and park in between these 2 hills that hide the truck and us pretty well. We've done this about 30 times up to that point, though never again after that night. We stop, and I commence the ritual of breaking it up to roll. He was talking about something, but I wasn't really listening until I heard his voice change. "Did you hear that?" he asked. We both listen, and I heard a strange, high-pitched, tinny sound for a split second. Suddenly, there was complete silence. The desert is actually a pretty loud place at night. I remember realizing that when the sound was gone. As we sat there for maybe 5 more seconds, my brother gasps, starts the truck, and floors it in rapid succession. We're flying out of the desert now, and I'm bouncing like a ball from his reckless driving. I'm asking him, WTF, man? As we go, but he says nothing. We hit the street, and the lights of a passing car show his face. He is pale and completely wide-eyed with his mouth open. I got scared at seeing so much fear from him and just sat there waiting for him to stop. He finally stopped at a McDonald's parking lot when we got back in town. He started crying. I just patted him on the shoulder and waited. After a few minutes he asked me if I remembered. Remember what, man? We were in the desert for like 5 minutes before you went flying out like a crazy asshole. He looked at me and started sobbing. He said it had me, and he couldn't do anything. He said it took me. At this point I started putting some things together. It was quiet out, no cars. Looked at one of those billboard clocks and saw it was 11:11 p.m. My brother told me something had grabbed me through my closed passenger window. He had gone for his pistol when he suddenly froze and couldn't move because the thing told him that if he didn't stay right where he was and wait, I would die, and he would be next. He said he felt it in his heart to be true. The thing that had me was very tall and thin with huge black eyes. He says he doesn't remember anything else about it, just tall and thin with huge black eyes. He sat frozen in absolute terror for hours while the thing disappeared with me in the desert. Then suddenly I appeared in the truck, and he gunned it out of there. Over the years, I've talked to him about it twice. He hates to even mention it. He is ashamed, I think, and still very afraid of it. He changed after this, always seeming to be less energetic and a little withdrawn. I wish it weren't like that. I wish I could be of assistance. I told him he is blameless, and I thanked him for getting us out of there. That's all I could do. I had contemplated hypnotizing myself several times, hoping to regain some of the memories I've heard others have. But whenever I think about it, I remember the light flashing over his face and the sheer terror I saw there. Better not to know, I think. Anyways, this is essentially a slap in the face of whatever it was. I told the story. Eat me. I want to share all of my creepy, unexplainable happenings. It all started when I was about 5 years old. I wasn't the kid who was afraid of everything, so this was always pretty strange. I had a poster of different kinds of dogs on it. I would say there were about 5 to 7 dogs on it. I was so afraid of it. I know it sounds totally weird, but no lie, as soon as my mom would tuck me into bed and turn the lights off, it was like they would come alive. I refused to sleep facing that direction, as the poster was right across from my bed. I always slept facing the wall. I could hear them breathing, panting, and some nights, I woke up to what felt like something that had even licked my hand. Fast forward about 4 years, and our family moved to Wyoming. After moving there, things got so crazy for me. My bedroom was in the basement, as was my sister's. Our mom's room was upstairs. One night, I woke up at about 3 a.m., and all of a sudden there was a bright flash of light that came from under my bed. Another night, there was a glowing green light outside my bedroom window, but there was no one outside. Do you know of those dolls that sit on swings? Well, I had been given one of those, except this one was a clown. I hated the thing. I even went so far as to keep it in my closet. One day, my mom decided that she was going to clean my room for me, because as a usual preteen, I hated cleaning, and she found the clown thing and hung it up in my room from one of those ceiling hooks. That night as I was getting ready for bed, keep in mind that I had no fans in my bedroom, the air vent was on the other side of the room, and there was no air circulating at the time this happened, the clown started swinging back and forth. I could find no explanation. I got a step stool, took it down, and threw it in the trash. That was the end of that. My older sister and I both had stereos in our bedrooms. One summer while she was away at camp, I was in my room reading a book, and all of a sudden I heard music playing. It was coming from her room. There was no one there that could have turned it on except for my mom and me. Mom was upstairs taking a nap. I ran and turned it off. I also had my stereo turn on by itself at completely random times, even when I would not be home. My mom would say, "Why did you leave your stereo on this morning?" I refused to be in my room alone for about a month. Skip ahead to when I was at college. One night I was really sick and had the flu. I was always super OCD about locking my dorm door, so I know for a fact, no doubt in my mind, that I had locked it. Anyways, I woke up in the middle of the night to a female asking me if I was okay and if I needed anything. I said no. She said that if I needed anything to just call out for her. I said all right and went back to sleep. I figured it was just the RA on duty, and the next morning, I noticed my door was unlocked. I went to thank whoever it was that was so concerned about my well-being, and the RA on duty was a male and said that he wasn't allowed to enter female rooms, he didn't even have access to a master key for the girls' hallways, and that no female RAs were even present that weekend. Then he filled me in about a ghost that looks after the girls in the dorm. What? Those are some of the strange things that have happened to me in my lifetime. Sorry about the writing, I am no author. Has anything like this ever happened to you? And what do you think could do all of this? So I don't exactly know where to start. When I was young, I would sleepwalk constantly to the basement, and I have no recollection of it. My house was old, built in the early 1800s or so, I believe, and it's on top of an old battlefield from the Civil War in Virginia, so the basement was extra creepy, and I don't know why I was drawn to it. Anyways, that stopped at age 7, and coincidentally, that was the same time that my imaginary friend decided to go on vacation, according to my little diary from 2001 that said, Yakub went on Baka, and Mom says I stopped sleepwalking. Horrible spelling for 7, I know. So 4 years later, right, my imaginary friend came back. I was 11, and he visited in my dreams as the soldier that I described in my journals. This Yakub, character was silent in my dreams, just always there in the background. He also always looked down to the ground and hid his eyes. Weird, right? Well, I always wondered about the eyes and if one was shot out or something, and I asked in a dream after months of seeing him. I think it was like every night for 2 months, maybe a little less. He, Dumpy, looked at me, and his eyes were replaced by white, empty, terrifying spaces that captivated me in the dream. I didn't dream of him again. 2 years have passed. I'm 13. I'm home alone with a stomach problem, and my dad is out of town. Mom and my brother are at my aunt's, and my grandparents are at their house next door sleeping. I was home alone overnight for the second time in my life. I remember every detail. It was 2 o'clock exactly, and I turned off the TV. I pulled the covers up, and I'm on my iPod about to play music when I hear growling from under my bed. I took my earphones out and freaked, pulling the covers over my head and shutting my eyes, and the growling continues, and it gets closer to the point where it sounds like something is hovering over me and growling in my face. Then it stopped. 2:08 I remember I looked at my phone, and it had been like 7 to 8 minutes. So I went to sleep thinking I would hear it again if I didn't. At 2:38, I regained consciousness, finding myself still enveloped in blankets. I stayed up thinking if I didn't hear it for a while, I could just get up and bolt. At 2:48, after deciding to give it 10 minutes, I pulled down the covers and made immediate eye contact with the demonic entity hovering directly above me. 16 feet tall, I swear, bony with skin that looked like leather and was suctioned onto the bones, black all over with these white, empty eyes, the same I saw in the Jacob character that was my friend. This thing had elongated pointer fingers, all creepy and bony. It had sharp teeth that looked cracked and overused. I assume its teeth were stained with blood. It had curly horns on either side of its head, and it just stared at me. It seemed like 30 seconds. To my surprise, the eyes were so empty that what I thought was 30 seconds or so was actually an hour and 12 minutes. I want to know the type of demon or entity this is and if it has a name. I really found this helpful. I'm now 20, and 7 years later I'm still wondering what this thing is. 'Cause now I see IT in my dreams. Please share your ideas about who or what this could be. So I've lived in a 90-plus-year-old house in Kentucky for about 6 years, and throughout all 6 years I've heard weird stuff. I'm almost 18. Now something you should know about me is that I am skeptical of the paranormal, but I have the philosophy, if I don't F with it, it won't F with me. There's no reason we can't just be in the same house and leave each other alone. The first thing I heard that really got my attention was 4 years ago. I was sitting in my basement, which is a repurposed cellar, playing video games on my laptop. I didn't have the sound on, and in the middle of a game of LOL, I both felt and heard someone whisper in my left ear. I bolted up the stairs as fast as I could and later wrote it off as the plumbing making weird noises. I had heard stuff before this, but that was back in middle school, so I don't see that as credible. Recently, maybe a month ago at the start of quarantine, my family was in the extension on the back of my house, which is a 2-story tall room with a bunch of windows. At 8 or 9-ish we heard rather heavy footsteps on the roof. There was no possible way someone could have gotten up there. My mom's reaction was, "Ha ha, WTF, was that a ghost?" I responded, "Don't go investigate the weird sound, that's how people die in horror movies." She proceeded to go investigate. There's a window that looks out onto that roof in my parents' bathroom, so she ran upstairs to check. She didn't see anything, so we laughed it off and said it was probably a ghost. Most recently, I was staying up late in my room, playing video games online with friends. I sense someone watching me around 3 a.m. It's that weird feeling where the hair on your neck stands up and you feel almost like a presence nearby. Well, I felt like there was something outside my second-story window about 2 feet away from me. I looked out and saw nothing. About an hour later I felt it again and heard the sound of a long scratch on a screen door like on silk. That sound gives me the goosebumps, like nails on a chalkboard or styrofoam being rubbed together. So I was like, WTF, that was weird, and dismissed it as house noises or night sounds. The next morning I looked out that window and found about an 8-inch long rip in the window screen. Has anyone had anything similar happen? Is my house haunted, old, or am I crazy? Shapeshifter sighting. So this freaked me and my mates out in our teens, and to this day we cannot explain it. One night a couple of my mates and I snuck out late at night. We were 14 to 15 at the time, and we walked down to the local Woolworths, which is just a grocery shop. We were skating around and just playing around in general when one of my mates spotted a rabbit. Being curious teens, we began chasing it through the car park, which I may add is lit very brightly due to street lights. As we were chasing it, I shit you not, this thing changed into a cat. We still kept chase as we obviously thought we were seeing things, which we were. It then changed into what obviously looked like a fox to us. May I remind you all that this place was lit up and we could all see it clear as day? One of my mates stopped chasing as he was confused, and understandably so. Just before this thing got to a nearby shrubbery, the other mate who was still chasing with me stopped and said, "What the FK is that?" This thing had literally turned into a cougar-like cat about 3 feet high and slowed down from its running speed to a walking pace and looked back at us as it slowly walked into the shrubs. We promptly went home. Whatever this was, it went from a small rabbit about a foot wide to a huge predator cat. I wish I had answers. A couple of years ago, I was out at night with my ex-fiancé. We were in a park with minimal light pollution, just enjoying the stars, and all of a sudden he goes, "What is that?" and is pointing at a figure, just slightly darker than the sky, flying past the power lines. This thing seemed enormous, like it was easily as big as a pickup truck, about 150 feet up. It also looked like it had feathers and was completely silent when it moved. It flew behind a power pole and didn't come out on the other side. We never saw it again. UFOs definitely exist because that thing was absolutely flying, and I had no idea what the hell it was. I moved into an apartment with my boyfriend at 19. It was an old building turned into apartments. Think early 1800s was when it was built. It used to be a market because the train tracks went right by it. My very first night staying there was alone, and I watched a light slowly creep one way across the wall and then back again. I never saw it again for the next year. He texted me when I was at work one day to tell me that something picked up our cat's food bowl, while they were eating, and threw it across the apartment. We heard footsteps on the roof at all hours of the night, which shouldn't have happened because we were on the very top floor. And I hated our bedroom closet. I'm still convinced there was something evil in there. The ceilings were tall AF in our apartment, so of course, it went all the way up into black nothingness. I had an old prom dress in one of those Dillard's bags that you get for nice dresses in there. I was home alone, chilling in bed with one of my cats when we heard the bag start rustling. The doors were shut, and I knew my other cat was in the living room. So my cat whips his head towards the closet and growls, which freaked me out even more because I already hate the closet enough. I refused to open the closet doors if my boyfriend wasn't home. He was asleep once, and I couldn't sleep that night, so I was scrolling through internet. I heard 4 distinct notes whistled from the closet. I could always just feel a bad vibe coming from it. No clue what it was, but I hated that stupid closet, and I was so relieved when we moved out. I could be here all day with weird little stories that have happened to both my BF and me, but I do have a nice one from when my grandmother's ghost moved into our house with us. She passed almost 15 years ago, but I took her cremains from my parents' house about 2 years back. We think something from the apartment followed us into our house. The day after I brought my grandma's cremains home, my BF texted me to tell me that one of the gas burners on the stove was on, not ignited, and the whole house was filled with gas. We have 2 windows in our bedroom, one of which we usually never opened. Somehow, while he was sleeping, and while the gas filled the whole house, the window in our room was unlocked and opened. He woke up to the room being ice cold because it was the middle of winter, so we obviously didn't open it. I think my grandmother opened the window for him. My weird little cabin in the woods. I moved into my rental about 2 years ago, and things have been happening from the start. First and most often, you can hear clear footsteps walking upstairs while downstairs, also going up and down the stairs, making them creak. I can see upstairs from the living room, and there's never anyone there, just their footsteps. Then there's the talking. I will be sitting in my dining room drinking coffee and will hear people in different rooms having a conversation. Can't really hear what's being said most of the time, just the back and forth of voices. Every now and then, things will move. I've had my furniture moved around twice while I slept. Once, I was talking to my wife when my son's phone flew off the shelf and hit me in the shoulder. I was about 5 feet from the shelf. Just last night I heard a sigh and asked my wife what was wrong. She was really confused because she thought I had been the one to sigh. The sound came from about a foot or so away. I was then woken by the oven timer going off, but nobody was awake to have turned it on. My wife has woken up twice to see someone standing above her. She just rolled over and went back to sleep. I've got more stories than I can count, but nothing is ever actually scary. Either that or we're just ignoring the fear because our rent is extremely cheap and we aren't leaving until we have to. We just kind of shrug it off and put things back the way they were before they moved or messed with. How would I go about documenting this on a budget? As I was typing this and drinking my coffee, my oven timer went off again. The only way to turn it on is to twist it, and I've been the only person awake. The whispering spirit under the bed. In 1988 I rented an old wooden house with my, then, wife. Sometime in the middle of the night, I was awakened by a very creepy noise that would alternate from a loud, irregular chanting to an almost whisper-like, eerie hiss. It was like nothing I'd ever heard. The hair on the back of my non-believer neck stood completely on end. Frankly, I was experiencing intense anxiety and doubting my rejection of the supernatural realm. I urgently woke up my wife but communicated for her to say nothing and just listen. I wanted to make sure I wasn't imagining the whole thing or dreaming. In just a few seconds, her eyes grew as large as saucers, and I received my answer. She clearly heard it too and was so terrified that she wasn't even able to speak at first. Finally, she summoned the courage to whisper to me, "What is that?" I shook my head in bewilderment. I had no explanation to give. The inhuman whisper didn't seem to be bothered at all by our awareness of it, and only the thundering beat of my heart partially drowned it out. It was very close to us, sounded less than 3 feet away, and as the man of the house, I was expected to investigate what it was. The hiss was actually coming from underneath our bed, specifically, directly under my side. I didn't have a bedside table or lamp, so the only way to turn on a light was to get up and walk over to the wall switch in the dark. You can probably understand why I was hesitant to do that. A little light did filter in from the streetlight across the road, through our curtain window, but it wasn't very much. It was not nearly enough to make me feel brave enough to investigate. Worse still, the ungodly whispering continued on, unabated. With courage I finally dredged up from somewhere I'll never know. I leaned over and peered underneath the bed to confront the unknown source of our terror. Slowly my eyes adjusted to the near total darkness under the bed, and I made out what was haunting us. Each night we carried a glass jug of water to bed with us so we didn't have to get up and go to the kitchen for a drink, one of those half-gallon sized orange juice jars with a metal lid. I quickly surmised that the hiss and chanting were actually coming from that darn possessed jug. The metal lid wasn't screwed on completely, and trapped air was escaping out the partially screwed on lid. After realizing that our chanting ghost was actually just escaping air from a water jug, we had a good little laugh, but it made me realize how brittle my disbeliever courage was. Less than a month later, I found myself with a neatly identical repeat of the situation, except I knew for a fact that we hadn't brought the water jug to bed with us. This time the hissing was different and sounded like a feral animal on the attack. Note, we didn't have any pets. Again I awoke my wife. She listened and heard the same close-by screeching, hissing noise that I did. I didn't have to remind her that we left the water jug in the fridge. She remembered that too. We both stared at each other in the dark. The noise was angry and threatening. It was almost like a series of guttural growls and fiery hissing. This time it seemed to be a little farther away than the first time, but still incredibly close. I pulled back the curtain and looked outside. Nothing. My heart raced. It was definitely coming from right outside the window, and yet, there was nothing I could see out there. The streetlight lit up the yard well enough to even see individual blades of grass, and yet the unexplained hissing continued. Finally, I stood up and put my face against the glass. When I peered down as sharply as I could, I was able to solve the mystery. 2 or 3 cats had cornered an opossum, and they were all having a hissing match near the side of the house. Only by looking directly down at an acute angle could I see them. In the dark, in the sterile stillness of the night, little unexplained things can seem like big unexplained things. I saw a cottage in the woods. The neighborhood I grew up in backed up to a deeply wooded area. It was the best place to grow up as a kid. We never thought of it as unsafe. We made paths to hike and built forts in the summer and learned to ice on its small ponds in the winter. One time my best friend and I hiked out to a tree fort that had been out there for a long time. We and other kids knew it well and played there often. As we came up the path to it, instead of the rickety old tree fort we knew so well, it looked like a complete cottage, with a door and windows with shutters. My friend and I gasped, screamed, and ran. I'm not sure why, but it was just so weird and unexpected. After a while we decided to sneak back and look again. But it was the same old rickety tree fort it had always been. I don't know what happened or what we saw. But we both saw it. Of course no adults believed us. It never happened again. Has anyone else heard of something like this? I went camping with 2 friends a few years ago. We went pretty far away from civilization. The nearest town had a population of 30 people and was an hour away from the lake we were at. It was cool. I usually try to get away while camping, but this was the most extreme to date, and you could feel it. During the first night the 3 of us were sleeping in the tent when I woke up to the noise of something brushing against the tent. The tent was around 5 feet tall at its peak, and whatever was in our sight was brushing against it near the top. I have never in my life been filled with such true fear. I've camped a lot and have had run-ins with bears and other animals and have been scared before, but this feeling was different. There was something extra unnerving about this. I stayed lying there completely still with my heart beating out of my chest as whatever this was kept methodically brushing against the tent. It wasn't making much other noise other than going back and forth on the tent. I put my finger up to my face and made the shh gesture before slowly poking my friend, who was sleeping facing me, awake. He heard the noise immediately, and his face dropped. He was wide awake, looking at me, as we just stared at each other wide-eyed. He spent a lot of time growing up on a reserve and the accompanying mostly untouched land in coastal BC, but later explained never experiencing anything like it. So we lay there for a minute, wide awake, practically shaking with fear, and then the next thing we know, we both woke up in the morning. We woke up at the same time and immediately started asking what the hell that was last night and what happened. We both felt so awake at the time and were having trouble understanding how we just fell asleep. We explained it to our other friend as he awoke to us frantically recapping the evening. When we left the tent and went back to the site, everything looked normal. There was a half-full box of Ritz crackers that we left out, our bad, untouched. The one thing that looked different is we had left a stack of red plastic cups out on the table, and they were all melted on one side to the point where we couldn't pull them out because they had a new indented mold. It blew our minds. We spent the whole day trying to figure out possibly how that could have occurred. It makes no sense. One of my friends fell very ill as the day went on. We decided to leave that site after that next night and camp the other 2 nights of our planned trip at a more populated site closer to home, as we were all very uneasy about what had transpired. I'm not even sure what I think happened. All I know is that it was the creepiest feeling I've ever felt. Whenever I and the friend who I woke up get together, the conversation ends up on that night, always with the quote, "What the hell happened that night?" A strange woman appeared next to us. I am currently 24 years old, and this event occurred during my high school years, possibly in the 10th grade, when I was approximately 15 years old. I still remember what happened vividly. My friends and I went to a party of one of our classmates in a not-so-good neighborhood. This is kind of relevant because it could explain what we saw. This takes place in a rural-ish part of Pennsylvania. This area is known to be very low income and drug-infested. Immediately when we pulled into the neighborhood, we all felt that the vibe was off. Now this area isn't necessarily unsafe, just rural, dark, and unsettling. So anyways, we attended this party. I feel the need to state that we were drinking, but no one was necessarily intoxicated, maybe a little tipsy. We decided after a little while to leave and packed into my friend's car. I remember being terrified as we drove through the neighborhood to leave, but no one could explain why. We thought we were just freaked out by the dark. We pulled up to a stop sign, and suddenly, out of literally nowhere, a woman seemingly materialized out of nowhere on the sidewalk to the right of us, walking her dog. Now it's about 2 in the morning. We look over to see if she is going to cross the street in front of us since she was facing us as if she was going to do so, and her face was expressionless. Then suddenly she lifts her right foot about 90 degrees in the air as if to take a large step off the sidewalk towards our car and opens her mouth and fully unhinges her jaw. Before she could even step into the car, my friend floored the gas. We didn't even turn around to see if she was still there. We all slept on the basement couch together that night because we were terrified. Either she was on hard drugs or we saw something supernatural. Either option is equally as creepy. A summer night, I went to my backyard to take my dog to the bathroom and had to pee, so I went by a tree. While I was peeing, I heard someone whistle. I thought it was just my imagination or the neighbors, but they whistled again, and I realized they were standing behind my pig pen, which is about 3 feet tall, in some bushes. I froze in fear for about 10 seconds until I yelled for my dog and ran inside. I informed my dad, who was the only person at home, to go outside with a gun and a flashlight, but they had already left. The next day I went out there, and I noticed the bush's limbs were pushed back and, broken off in some places right where they were standing. I still have no idea who it was, lol. Scared the shit out of me. I have another unexplained thing. One night when I was like 10, I was camping with some relatives on their property and was looking up at the night sky. All of a sudden the stars started trading places and moving around. I thought it was just my eyes because I was tired, but then my uncle was like, "Oh shit," he said he had seen the same thing, and so had everyone else there. That was creepy as hell, too. When I was a kid, my parents, 4 siblings, and I moved into an old house in Maine. My parents were an interior designer and remodeling contractor at the time. They would fix the house and the rooms to look better, and in a few months we would be out of there and buy our dream house, but that didn't happen. As soon as I walked into that house, I had a terrible feeling that something or someone was watching us. For the first few nights, nothing really happened except for some pipes making noise and a foul smell coming from the kitchen, but it was an old house, so I just brushed it off. But on day 4 of living there, my little sister, I thought, came in my room and lay on my bed. This wasn't weird because my little sister always had awful nightmares, and she would always come lay with me for some comfort. I started to go back to sleep, but then my sister started squeezing my hand so tight that I couldn't move it, and I started crying about how bad it hurt. I kept telling her to stop and that it really hurt, and then I had enough momentum to get her hand off of my hand and got up and saw there was nothing. My sister was never in my room. I started crying even more at the thought that someone was in my room, and I started questioning myself. Who was that? Was it some kind of joke? Was I just dreaming? I knew I couldn't sleep in that room by myself again that night, so I went to go sleep with my big sister in her room, and she asked me why I was sleeping with her. I told her everything, and she just told me that Anna, my little sister, was probably just playing a joke on me and that I have nothing to worry about. I asked my little sister the following morning if she thought it was funny that she made me cry last night. She said she didn't know what I was talking about and said she was in her room all night. After hearing that, my body went numb. I didn't know what to say to her. I just walked away and went to sit in the reading room and to process all of this. After a few minutes of sitting there, I told my parents about what happened, and after telling them, they just told me I was probably just dreaming and told me to watch less TV. I knew I didn't dream that whole thing. I just wished time would go faster so I could get out of this house, I thought. After a month went by, I forgot about what happened and just went back to sleep in my room, but I started to notice that my mom was acting weird, like doing things she had never done before. One night my dad woke to my mom sleeping on him with a knife on his neck. My dad grabbed the knife from her hand and threw it across the room. My dad continued to say, "What the FK are you doing?" My mom woke up and started crying. My dad suggested that she take a break from building the house and go live with her mom for a few days. My mom agreed with that statement and kept saying she was sorry and didn't know what got into her. A couple of days later, my mom packed her stuff and went to Florida to go see her mom. At least we thought she was doing that. Later at night, my old sister went down to get a glass of water until she saw our mom standing in the kitchen. She didn't say anything and walked away to go tell our dad. After hearing that my mom was in our house, my dad jumped out of bed and went to find her until he saw my mom jump from the second-story balcony. My dad tried to catch her but got there too late. My mom ended herself. We don't know why she did it. My mom was the happiest person we knew, and all I know is she didn't do that to herself. There was something telling her to jump. I'm going back to that house after 20 years. I need answers. Wish me luck. I was recently talking to my siblings about a house we used to live in about 20 years ago. Each of us shared their experiences in that house regarding weird, unexplainable things that would occur, like hearing footsteps when they were alone or hearing things from another room in the house when no one else was there. My sister swore she heard coming from another room the noise a VCR makes when a tape is being taken out. It's a very distinct sound that can't be replicated or confused with something else. When she went to investigate, she saw that the VCR wasn't even plugged in. Needless to say, she was very freaked out. I also experienced similar experiences, my fair share of hearing footsteps to hearing someone coming in the house and then realizing no one was there. One particular time that really freaked me out was the time I was in the living room watching TV. It was at night, and I was home alone when I heard something fall coming from the kitchen. The kitchen is right next to the living room, so just by looking to my right, I would have a clear view of the kitchen. When I heard the noise, I instinctively turned to face the kitchen but didn't see anything because the lights were off. I could only see the white doorway illuminated by the TV. The sound of hearing something fall didn't freak me out. It wasn't loud and sounded like it was something small that could have fallen by some gust of wind coming from the open windows in the kitchen. So after I just glanced, I turned back to continue watching TV. After about 20 minutes, I went to the kitchen to grab something to drink. I turned on the lights to the kitchen and opened the fridge to get my drink. After I closed the fridge, I stepped on something and looked down to notice a small rectangular magnet. My family always had this magnet on the fridge. So I just picked it up and put it back on the fridge without thinking much of it. I turned off the lights and went back to watch TV. 5 minutes later I hear the same sound again. This time I get up right away to check it out. I turned on the lights in the kitchen, and there is the magnet on the floor again. I was more confused than scared. I picked it up and examined it. This rectangular magnet was about 1 inch long and about 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick and had some good weight to it. I thought to myself that maybe the magnet is too heavy and not strong enough to stay on the fridge, and maybe that's the reason it keeps falling. So I put it back on the fridge and then tried pulling it off, and this thing needed a good amount of pull to take it off. It wouldn't budge without using a good amount of force. So that confused me even more, and I was starting to get a bit freaked out. I left the magnet on the fridge after messing around with it and realizing it won't fall off without being taken off. This time I leave the lights on in the kitchen and go back to the living room. Not even a minute goes by after I sit on the couch when I hear the damn magnet again. This time I go full freak out and start turning all the lights in the house. Luckily, my parents came back soon after to put me at ease. Threw that magnet away in the trash. I wasn't going to go through that again. I went camping with a BF I had in college. This was almost 20 years ago. We got a little lost in the woods and came upon a large clearing. There was a large group of people in the clearing, probably about 25 or 30 people of all ages, old people, kids, and their parents. The first thing that struck me as strange was that we didn't hear them until we stepped out into the clearing. The second strange thing was that they were all wearing rags. Their clothes were dirty and barely holding together, and they were playing baseball, but with an old 2x4 as a bat and a cloth ball. We approached an older man, told him we were lost, and he pointed to the woods, indicating which way we should go, but instead of talking to us, he was laughing. When we looked around, the other people there started laughing as well. I and my BF thanked him and went in that direction. I remembered telling my BF, as we stepped back into the thick woods, that was weird. He said something somewhat non-committal, like, yeah. In about a half hour we came out of the woods onto a paved road and proceeded to walk down the road, still pretty lost. A ranger soon drove up, and we stopped him to ask how to get back to our campsite. After getting directions, I asked the ranger about the people in the woods. The ranger looked confused and kind of half chuckled like he thought I was joking. I went on to tell him they were playing stickball. The ranger looked even more confused and said he had worked there for almost 20 years and had never heard of or seen anything like that. He kept looking from me to my BF. I looked at my BF because I was getting a little irritated that he hadn't spoken up about what we saw. But when I looked at my BF, he was just kind of nervously smiling and shrugging. He shook the ranger's hand, and we started walking back to camp. By then we had walked for a few hours in 90+ heat, although we did have water, so I was even more irritated on the walk back. After walking in silence for a while, I asked, "What just happened there?" My BF said, "I don't know. I wasn't sure what you were doing." I thought he might not have understood what we were talking about, and I said, "No, I mean when I told the ranger about the people in the woods." My boyfriend looked at me for a moment, looked like he was trying to read whether I was joking or not, then said, "Shell, I don't know what you're talking about. We didn't see anyone in the woods. We found ourselves lost. If we had met someone, we would have asked directions." I dropped it, not sure what was going on. Before you ask, nope, I didn't take any drugs. Anyway, 20 years later my old BF reconnected with me, and after talking with him for a while, I asked him if he remembered when we camped and got lost in the woods. He said he remembered and mentioned a few details of the day. I asked him if he remembered the people we met in the woods, and he laughed and said that I was probably mixing him up with another BF on a different camping trip because he didn't see anyone in the woods until we ran into a park ranger. I still have a very detailed memory of it but still don't know what really happened that day. My strange experience doing a nighttime survey of the rainforest. I've wanted to share this story for a while and finally convinced myself that it would be worth the channel's time. This is a relatively mild experience compared with a lot of the things I've listened to here, but it is 100% true and is still the strangest thing I've ever experienced. As part of my university degree, I went to the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico to do field surveys in various parts of the rainforest. We traveled across several sites looking at plants and animals and doing a bunch of tests. This one site in particular was a sectioned off part of the rainforest about 2 miles in diameter that was semi-managed by the government. We went there once in the day, walked around the site, did our tests, and then went back to the hotel. The rest of the day we were allowed to relax and study our notes, and then in the evening we headed back there to study the nightlife in the rainforest. We arrived at the site, unpacked our gear, paired up with our accountability buddies and groups, and then went into the rainforest. We had one torch per group, so a lot of us used the torches on our phones to see where we were going. We walked around the same route as we had in the day, and I was vigilant in checking my phone and its battery because I was terrified of getting lost in the dark in the rainforest. We were just over halfway with the loop around the site, and I was sitting comfortably at around 80% battery as I had the foresight of fully charging before heading out. Then nothing. The last thing I remembered was admiring the reflection of the eyes of the crocodiles, intently keeping watch over our group. Then, when I came back to, I was on the other side of one of the villages that we had seen earlier in the day alone. My phone was at 1% battery, I was completely separated from my group, and I remember just staring into this old abandoned hut with the dim light of my phone. I immediately started to panic before I heard the laughter from another group on the opposite side of this small village about 50 feet away, so I rushed over and formed up with them. When I eventually reconnected with my group, they were worried and said that I was walking along, not saying anything, and then when we reached the village, they lost sight of me. I've tried to be as rational as I can thinking about the experience. I was tired, getting used to a new climate and arguably not as hydrated as I should have been, which could obviously play several large roles. However, it is important to note that I have a phenomenal memory, as that is how I have learned to study, and to completely forget what would have been a 40-minute walk is incredibly unlike me. Thinking back on the event, I still get chills, and the more I try to rationalize it, the more I feel like something unexplainable happened that night. My only comfort really is that apart from the fear of being abandoned in the rainforest at night, I never felt threatened or in any danger. Edit, to address some more questions I've received. We were put into groups of 3 to 4, and there were 8 groups walking in a straight line about 20 feet apart from each other with the lectures leading the front and back. I have talked to a few people and done a few Google searches, and I'm not discounting the possibility that I may have had some sort of physical ailment or dissociative episode. The only thing that still eludes me is how I would manage to walk away without being noticed by anyone and how much battery my phone immediately drained in that short period. Weirdest stay over at cousin's place. One of my cousins had recently moved to a new neighborhood, and she had a housewarming party. We all cousins met after a long time. Our family is huge, so I have a lot of cousins. 8 of us decided to stay over, and we smoked some weed and had a lot of fun, and then when we were all out of dopamine, we just sat there talking for like an hour or two. One of the maids went inside a room, and we all saw her go in as we were all sitting in the main hall. After a few minutes the door slowly creaked open. They hadn't installed the doors for some reason, so they were using some creaky old wooden doors for the time being. Not all of us noticed it until it slammed shut. That got all of our attention. And then it slowly started to open, creaking noisily, and it slammed shut again, and now we started to hear the maids' bangles slamming against each other at crazy speed. In India, most of the middle-aged and old women tend to wear a lot of bangles on their hands. That was creepy, so we started calling out the maid's name, and that's when it got crazy. One of my cousins decided to go check what was happening, so he stepped into the room, and to his surprise, he didn't find anyone at all inside the room. There was no one, and he freaked out and ran back. We all went in, turned on the lights, and searched everywhere, even though we already knew there was no one in there. We were all creeped out, and we went back out and started to make sense of it. We never could. We had the most dedicated discussion of our lives at that point, and it went on for an hour or two. My cousin also said that she experienced some other unexplainable shit too in the past few days, and she didn't expect it to happen with so many people in the house. So eventually we all gave up on it, and some of the cousins decided to sleep. 4 of us decided to go for a night walk. We went out. This neighborhood was very weird. People were creepy, and the whole area was built on a hill or something, as it was so steep it was literally like climbing up and down a hill, and we first saw an old woman walking up the hill. It was 3 a.m., and she was hunched like crazy. She moved in a creepy way past us, and we were like, damn, okay. Then we turned a corner, and that street was the creepiest. People, or shadows, were looking at us from the windows. First I thought it might be the after effects of weed or something, but then all of us saw the people, so we were like, let's take a turn around the corner, and started walking faster, and then some woman came out and threw a glass of water on us from a balcony. We were so confused why this neighborhood was so weird. We turned the corner and headed back and went past a black street dog, and when one of us was opening the gate slowly, so that we didn't disturb the whole neighborhood, we saw a dog. its legs, moving in the shadows. Then we turned to our right, and that's when we saw at least 10 identical black street dogs just staring at us. That tripped us out, and we went in, and one of us said that as we walked down that creepy street, more and more dogs started walking behind us. They kept increasing in number, according to him. But that shit tripped me out. Maybe those dogs could sense something weird in the neighborhood? 'Cause, people say dogs can sense otherworldly shit. Maybe they were protecting us? I don't know, but it was very creepy. We went back to the other cousins, who had decided to put out mattresses on the floor in the main hall itself and had slept, so we too put it out there and decided to sleep. The next morning everything felt better, and we all told my cousin to move again because this neighborhood was ducked up. When we went home, the streets still were creepy, the kids playing were creepy, not at all normal, it was a wild sleepover altogether. And the maid had gone home that night. She never was there. So yeah, that's ducked up. Unexplained experiences. I cannot in good conscience say that I have ever experienced any entity with any amount of certainty. However, I will share 2 stories with family and friends when the topic of paranormal encounters comes up and thought this would also be a good place to share. Both took place in the same house and around the same time. Built in the late 1920s, the house was a small 3-bedroom, single-story bungalow. And when I say small, I mean very, very small. The previous owners were a family of 4 that had lived at that residence for several decades. Now that the children had grown up and moved away, the parents decided to take advantage of a hot housing market and sold to a house flipper. I moved into the newly renovated home alone with my 6-month-old dog. From the beginning, I always felt a presence or as though someone was watching me while in the house. However, the neighborhood was not without its share of crime, vandalism, homelessness, and drug use, which led me to be a little more on guard than usual, so I always blamed it on that overall sense of unease living in that area of town. Incident 1. I am in the bathroom brushing my teeth before bed. My dog entered the bathroom to wait for me to finish so we could go to bed together. About halfway through, the hair on my neck begins to stand up. My first thought is that it's always a little drafty in this older home. However, out of nowhere, a hoarse, deep voice angrily says my dog's name from what sounded like the dining room. Again, it was a tiny house where I could see the dining room from the bathroom. I completely freeze. My dog, having difficulty keeping his eyes open while lying on the floor, bolts up to all fours and is locked at attention, standing in the doorway, staring intensely towards the dining room. For those of you who have never owned a puppy, they are known for 2 things, being unaware of danger and also being extremely curious. 999 out of 1,000 times, my dog would have approached the noise to see what it was. However, that was not the case this time. He stood like a statue, staring at my dining room. He did not budge. He did not flinch. He did not move the rest of the time we were in the bathroom together. Once done getting ready for bed, we walked to the bedroom, experiencing no other disturbances or voices that night. Somehow, we were both able to fall asleep after that. Incident 2. I am watching the Summer Olympics on TV. It's a quiet night at home alone. My dog is standing on my lower stomach, playing tug-of-war with a braided rope toy. He is relentless, so this was going on for a while. We are playing so rough and loud that I could barely hear the TV in the background. The next thing I know, I hear what sounds like a piece of dog food hitting the metal front door so hard that it skips across the floor. It was thrown into the room from the kitchen, where his food is kept. By this point, my dog was very familiar with the sound of food dropping on the floor, so he immediately let go of his toy, bolted off the couch, and devoured the food as quickly as possible. I sit straight up. Confused. Startled. I pick up the rope toy off my lap, wondering if food somehow got wedged in the weaving and then squeezed out during the back and forth of playing. But I keep telling myself that at the velocity at which the food hit the door, it would have crumbled in the toy before ever popping out. I never could figure out how that happened, but it always made me think that if there was a ghost, it didn't want us roughhousing anymore. And just like that, no other incidents occurred. My dog and I moved out of that house a little over a year later. I briefly kept in contact with the person who bought the house from me, curious to know if she'd ask me about any strange occurrences. But I never heard a peep from her about it, though she did not end up living there for very long. Alright, people, what do you think? Are there logical explanations for what I experienced? If it was a ghost, could dogs have scared or annoyed it? Terrifying experience. As an empath and sensitive, I have been haunted by experiences my whole life. Though I try not to talk about them much. My friend suggested I talk about them on here to help me cope better. So here goes, I guess. This is one of the most traumatizing experiences I have ever experienced to date. This occurred when I was in my sophomore year of high school. At the time I was living with my mom in an old schoolhouse that was repurposed into apartments. It started out as a normal Saturday night in June. One of those hot/muggy nights where it was uncomfortable no matter what you did. A couple of my friends and I decided to walk around town and hang out by the river, like we always did. We all were night owls. After a couple of hours just hanging out, we decided to head up to the road back to my apartment around 1-ish. We stopped for a few minutes in front of an old church that was by my apartment, just joking around. We were having a good time like any other night. All of a sudden I feel a heaviness around me, almost like the energy around us had become suffocating. It was like there had been a switch that was flipped. No longer was there a positive light energy around us, but a negative, heavy energy had taken its place. The air became freezing cold. Goosebumps formed all over my arms, and the hair on the back of my neck was standing straight up. I started to shiver a little. Which was odd since a few moments before, it had just been so warm that we all had sweat droplets on our foreheads. I became alarmed, sensing something was wrong. My gut was telling me to be cautious. To run and protect myself. Almost like I was in danger. I looked around to see what was going on and saw nothing. It was when I looked back at my friends that I saw it. It started slow. Their eyes started to turn solid black. Almost as if their pupils took over their whole eyes, and nothing else could be seen but the darkness. I was speechless at first. Thinking I was seeing things, I blinked a few times, yet the changes were still there. Their eyes were still filled with darkness. I tried to call their names, but I got no response other than their unblinking black stares. I started to become more uneasy. Suddenly their eyes started to leak a black-like liquid from the bottom of their eyes. It ran down their face and dripped down to their neck and onto their shirts. I started to panic, unsure if I was going crazy or not. Against my instincts, I went a little closer, thinking it was a trick of the light. That they were just pulling a prank on me. Yet it only became clearer the closer I became. As I was about to reach out to them, the streetlights flickered, and then they all went out at once. I jumped, not expecting to be cast in darkness, and looked around, freaking out a bit. As I looked back to my friends, I saw something horrific. Their faces started to elongate, almost as if it were made of clay, and someone stretched out the bottom part of their face. The same darkness that replaced their eyes was also in their mouth now, except you could see these yellow, jagged teeth. They looked so sharp that they looked like they could do some serious damage. A deep guttural growl came out, and I screamed. I started to run, and one of my friends grabbed me. A pain coursed through me from the spot she touched. Almost as if I had been burned. Her breath smelled of death and rotting meat. I gagged, almost throwing up. I thought I was going to die. Whatever had a hold of them was going to kill me, I thought. It felt as if time slowed down to a snail's pace. I am not religious. My grandmother was an abusive extremist and always used religion as an excuse for her actions. So I had always avoided any kind of religion at that point. Yet I prayed, begged, and cried out in my mind to anything and or anyone to help me. Then, without warning, it all stopped. Gone were their black, leaking eyes and stretched out faces with jagged yellow teeth. Gone were the guttural growls and breath that smelled of death. In place were their normal faces and normal voices. With their mint breath from the gum they chewed not too long ago. I started to shake and cry. My friend tried to hug me, but I flinched away. The image of her with those black, bleeding eyes, stretched out face with their jagged yellow teeth, and the death breath seared into my mind. I was able to finally calm down a few minutes later. Though I still felt the burn of where my friend grabbed me. I looked at the spot on my arm where her hand had been, and there was a red welt in the shape of her fingers. I tell them slightly frantically what happened. They had an odd look on their face that had me worried. They both said that they remember us joking around, and then the air got heavy. The next thing they remember is me crying and shaking. Almost as if they blacked out for a moment. We were all terrified afterward and ran to my apartment. The three of us stayed up all night with my bedroom light on, huddled together. Once morning came, they all hurried home. After that morning, they both refused to speak of what happened to us. They thought if they spoke of it, then it would cause whatever was with us that night to come back. I have never known such primal fear, like I felt that night. Even to this day, thinking or talking about this makes me shake, my eyes fill up with tears, and my throat closes. I just hope that whatever was with us that night never returns. This is an experience that seems unbelievable even years later. I was probably 13, so like 7 years ago, in the home I grew up in, which always had a feel that something was there. My parents and siblings all had weird experiences. Electronic toys would often go off in the middle of the night, and I even snapped a selfie with an unmistakable and completely unexplainable face in the background. This happened one morning when I woke up to go to school. My alarm went off at 7 o'clock, and I went to the bathroom like usual. I sat down to pee, and I suddenly heard an alarm. It was similar to the National Weather Alert System alarm in that it was loud and jarring, a frequency made to be heard from far away. This alarm went off 3 times, and a female voice said, "Is there anybody there? Is there anybody there? Is there anybody there?" It was almost automated, but too lively human. I froze. It's important to note that the house also housed 3 other people and a dog, who would have definitely freaked out and barked if she heard any sort of noise before anyone else was awake. My sister's room was adjacent to the bathroom. She's a light sleeper, and the alarm and voice were loud. I didn't move a muscle as minutes passed. Then, again. The alarm continues to ring. Is there anybody there? Is there anybody there? Is there anybody there? I was going through what could possibly be happening in my mind and couldn't find anything. Is there evidence of an alien abduction? Did humans go extinct, and are they looking for survivors? I was just staring blankly ahead and did not lift a finger. At around 7:20, my sister got up. She knocked on the door and asked if everything was all right. I told her what happened, and she said she didn't hear a thing. My mom was asleep for a while longer after this, too. So, like, WTF? Most bizarre experience of my life. Any thoughts? Or maybe even a similar experience? My strange encounter in Duchesne, Utah. I've been wanting to get this story off of my chest for a while. I've told a few people here and there, but it really doesn't give me any closure as to what happened, and holy shit, was this ducking creepy. Where the hell do I begin? Well, first off, my name is Dakota. I'm from Salt Lake City, Utah, and I've lived here all of my life. I live in the city, but I love the outdoors. During the summer, I'm always out hiking with friends or fishing and camping. It's the thing to do. One of my best friends, we'll call him George, would always talk to me about his father's property out in Duchesne. They had a few acres with trailers and RVs scattered around this little sandy cliffside that they lived next to that would actually drop you down into the canyon if you were brave enough to trek. He would always tell me about the freedom they had out there. You could go shooting wherever you wanted, even stand outside your own home butt-ass naked, and no one would give a shit because no one was around to see you. Anyway, back to the story. So George had invited me to go out to his father's property with him and was really excited to go since I had never actually been out toward Duchesne. The drive there from SLC is about an hour and a half to about 2 hours away, so it's a decent one. When we arrived, I was pleasantly surprised to see his property was exactly as he explained it to me, and I ducking loved it and couldn't wait to get out and explore. I should remind you that his property was in the middle of nowhere. Right off of an old closed highway and up a hill, seriously in complete dry barren wilderness. There are cougars, bears, coyotes, rattlesnakes, and plenty of other animals that wouldn't mind making you their lunch, but even so we had plenty of firearms there to make sure nothing would happen. And that's another thing I need you to remember, we were armed to the teeth with firearms. George had just recently bought an 18 inches sawed-off 12-gauge double-barreled shotgun as well as an AK-47. His dad also owned a plethora of other weapons, which included a .30 to 30, .300 Ultramag, 12-gauge pump-action, 24 inches long barrel double-barrel, and plenty of other handguns and revolvers, so there was no fear of anything happening on our trip. I think we were there for about 3 or 4 days just having a ton of fun target shooting and hunting rabbits and snakes, but the last night we were there, some really, and I mean really weird shit happened to us, and I still cannot explain to anyone exactly what happened and what I saw. I'm sorry I've been dragging this out, I just really needed to explain how candid we were about this. We really just thought we were going on a little vacation to get away from everything, then we would be home, and that was that. Holy duck, was I wrong, though, so that last night we were there, George, his father, and I had been drinking and playing poker and just having a fun time when I and George decided to head up to a trailer where we could just hang out together and reminisce about the old days. We get to the trailer, and mind you, he has his AK-47, and I'm holding on to his sawed-off shotgun. George decides to call his girlfriend back in Salt Lake to see how she was doing, and I didn't think anything of it at all till, for some reason, while they were on the phone, she had brought up the subject of a Wendigo. Us being out in the middle of nowhere and kind of getting creeped out, we told her to cut it out and quit trying to scare us because we had this dumb belief that if you even mentioned a Wendigo, you would just be stalked by it, even though we knew that they're just myths. As George is speaking with his girlfriend on the phone, I'm lying on this half sofa type deal right next to the wide open window on the right side of the trailer, and I swear to God I was seeing what looked like a person in the distance in the shrubbery and small trees walking back and forth, almost trying to conceal themselves but not doing a decent job. At this point I tell George what I'm seeing, and he starts to worry his girlfriend because she's hearing us talk out loud about how we think we're being watched. Again, this was right after the mentioning of a Wendigo. George gets off the phone with his girlfriend and just now reminds me that the trailer we were in did not have a lock on it. I'm like, what the duck, dude? Let's get the duck out of here, or at least get to a trailer we can lock. As I'm saying this, I noticed that the figure had gotten closer to the trailer, and I got a better look at who or what it was. One thing that I saw that I literally have burned into my brain was the thing's neck. It was way too long to be a normal human. It stretched out and almost caused its head to bob around like a weight on top of a loose spring. Once I said this, he wasn't against leaving but mentioned that we would have to go outside where this guy was if we wanted to get anywhere, and so we made a very difficult choice. We only had a small electric lantern that would only illuminate about 5 or 6 feet in front of us as we were standing back to back with our weapons in hand, literally ready to shoot anything that got close to us. We just stood back to back and circled around and around as we walked to the other trailer that was about 50 yards away, and during that time we were ducking hysterical. We didn't hear any footsteps following us or anything moving in the distance as we slowly but surely went to the other trailer. This is when this story gets kind of ducked up and still makes me sick just thinking about it. We finally got to the other trailer that had a lock, and we got in, and we tried to be as silent as we could. We didn't even want to risk looking out the windows or moving the curtains to give away where we were at, even though they definitely knew where we were. About an hour passes, and we think we're in the clear, and the next thing we know, we are looking at the shadow of this thing or person standing directly in front of the moonlight in front of the curtain window, standing completely still, with no movement whatsoever. At this point we are about to piss and shit our pants all at the same time, and then as soon as it was there, it was gone. We didn't see it move or hear it or anything. We just looked back after a second, and it was gone. Ducking gone. The oddest thing happened after this, though. I started to hear a pig. A ducking pig. Like it was in its pen, oinking up a storm, and I turned to George to ask him if he was hearing the same thing I was, and we just heard this weird disembodied voice come from outside the trailer. Oink. Not like a pig but a person, but this voice was sinister. Like they wanted us to know they knew we were afraid, and it was said mockingly. I don't know if this really was just some guy in a weird getup just going around and terrorizing some random people's properties or if it really was something else. I have no ducking clue, but I never want to go back out there to find out. If anyone has any information or can help me at all figure out what ducking happened, I would very much appreciate it. Till then, I'm trying not to think about this. One other thing, this happened about 3.5 years ago during the summer of 2017. When I was a little kid, about 5 to 6, I was sleeping alone in my bedroom, which I usually shared with my older sister, who was away that night. I had a lamp above the side of my bed. This is important for the story. Anyway, I went to sleep and woke up needing to go to the restroom late at night, which was across the hall, so I got out of bed and saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was this hairy monster-looking thing sitting cross-legged on the floor below the nightlight on the side of the bed. This is the only time in my life I felt like I needed to scream, but nothing would come out. I was frozen in fear. The monster grabbed me and put me on his lap, face down, and bit my lower back hard. Next thing I know, I wake up, and I'm hurting on my back, and I get up and look out the window. I don't know why, I thought maybe I'd see something. I didn't see anything and thought I dreamt it and went back to sleep. The next day my mom is putting a shirt on me and freaks out and says, "What happened to your back?" I looked, and sure enough, there was a bloody scab in the shape of a bite. I told her the story, and she said she believed me always. Still to this day, I don't know what that creature was, and I've never seen it again, even 20 years later. I still remember it like yesterday, though. I have had dreams about a creature since we moved into our current house in 2007. We moved to this house in 2007 when I was 11 years old. I'm a girl, if that's important. The house was obviously haunted from day one. We all knew we weren't alone. Even my skeptical parents couldn't deny it. Events such as lights flickering, the animals avoiding rooms, auditory events, power cuts, and the odd behaviors I exhibited at night. I know this page is about the paranormal, and creatures aren't exactly paranormal, but I swear this is linked to the hauntings in our house. The creature I've been dreaming of is very strange. He's a black blob, basically like a rectangle, but the corners are softly rounded. He is much taller than me. Even now, as an adult, he still seems to be so much taller, like I haven't grown. He doesn't have a human face. I'm not actually sure he has a face really. If in my dream I see him from the corner of my eye, I see the long black shape with a shapeless smear of white at the top. My first dream was at night in my backyard. I was outside for reasons I don't know. Around the side of the house, my dad and brother were standing under the security light digging for something. I was watching them from the back wall. Let me explain the layout. Our yard is rectangular, and on either short side of the rectangle, you can see the sides of the house. So I stood against the long end of the rectangle facing the house in such a way I could see my dad and brother. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the creature and knew he was there. My dad started calling to me to come in. He was kneeling and holding his hands out like I was a kid. He kept saying, "Come straight here to me, look at daddy, look at my face, don't look at him, baby," and he was trying to keep calm and get me to go directly to him without looking at the creature. I did as I was told, shaking when I walked past the creature and being relieved but confused when I got to my dad. When I got to him, the creature was still standing, watching us, but we didn't look directly at him. I asked my dad who it was and why I wasn't allowed to look. My dad looked very serious and told me, "You never look at him, he smiles to lure people in, and a smile back will bring disaster." In the dream I started calling him the smiling man. I know there is a smiling man creepypasta, but this smiling man is not the same one. He isn't ever moving, and you can't look at him because something bad will happen if you smile. I had many dreams where he would be in my peripheral vision all the time, and I would always get up in my dream and walk away from him. I knew instinctively there was something wrong with the smiling man, that he wasn't right somehow. I used to talk about him, and everyone brushed it off as a creepy imaginary friend I created to make myself feel better about moving away from all our friends and family. After a month of having these dreams about the smiling man, I started to creep my parents out. One night I went to bed at 9 p.m., and I remember looking over at a corner in my room and feeling like I had to stare at it. My dad came into my room at 3 a.m. and found me speaking a language neither of us know while looking at the corner. My dad says I even gave pauses as if expecting a response. He snapped me out of it by turning on the light. I looked at him and felt like he had woken me up. I asked him why he was waking me up. He told me I'd been awake. I was sitting up with my eyes open. It was very creepy. My dad took me out of the room, and I slept with him and my mom. That was just one such incident. I did a lot of creepy things in this house, always at night and always unexplainable. My dad was able to explain to a friend who was a language expert some of what I'd said, and she thought from certain words that it was Romanian, but she couldn't be sure without hearing full sentences and clearer pronunciation. I went away for university between 2017 and 2019. This year I moved back home while I looked for work, an effort hindered by COVID. During that time I never had dreams of him and never did anything out of the ordinary. The dreams have become more frequent since I've been home. It's like he has time to make up for, and I've experienced more auditory and sensory experiences. I've heard voices in my ear when I'm trying to sleep. I've seen lights in my room with no explanation for where they are coming from, and I have begun to sleepwalk again. I've been tempted to just look at him and find out what he is and how he is tied into the hauntings, because I know he isn't the only one in the house. There are more, and the rest are distinctly normal and safe. He doesn't feel right next to them, and I wonder if he is a creature. He's never touched me or been closer than arm's length. If he has spoken to me, I can't remember it. I'm curious to see if anyone else had dreamt of him. Or is he unique to our home? For surely if he was free to roam, he would have followed me to university? Does anyone know what he is? Does anyone know what will happen if you smile at him? I visited St. Augustine when I was about 9 years old with my family and some friends. While we were there, we went to the Castillo de San Marcos, a Spanish fort built in the late 1600s. In the fort there is a corner room with no windows called the Black Room. It was used to store weapons but was walled up for a few hundred years, and when they opened it up again, they found human skeletons in the room, meaning that they had been walled up alive. So I was alone in this part of the fort with my mom. As she was reading the description of the room, I was crouching down and looking into the room. There was a small arch to go into it. There was clearly no one else in the room, and as I said before, no windows. I suddenly felt a powerful burst of wind come shooting out of the room and go right through me. I'm not exaggerating, it felt like it went in one side of my body and out the other. I ran from one side of the fort to the other in about 30 seconds. I probably would have set a world record if someone had been timing me. I was really scared. Anyway, a bit after that, we went into the room with a big group of people, and nothing scary happened. Years later I was watching the Travel Channel around Halloween time, and they had a documentary about Halloween attractions around the world. After that was done, Ghost Adventures came on. I usually don't watch shows like that because I've never found them very interesting, but this episode was about the Castillo de San Marcos, so I decided to watch it. In the episode they go into the same room, and while in the room the host stops talking mid-sentence and says, "Oh my God, I just felt like a burst of wind go through me." Needless to say, I had goosebumps all over after seeing that on TV. I still get goosebumps while talking about it. I get it if you don't believe me, because I probably wouldn't believe it if it hadn't happened to me. But that was the creepiest thing that has happened to me that I can't explain. Am I haunted? Creepy occurrences, past and present. I decided to share this after having a series of weird occurrences at my house recently. I'm not sure why I'm making it, maybe to make myself feel better or organize my thoughts. I've had unexplained or paranormal things happen to me my whole life, so it was hard to know where to start really. I apologize if this becomes lengthy, looks like it did, but I wanted to give a little backstory before I get on with the current events, and I thought you guys might like the series of short stories. Backstory: as a kid and teen, and even now, my mom and I always had a strange connection. We would frequently answer the phone before it rang when one of us was calling the other. I would get gut feelings that something was wrong or she needed to talk to me and would call, and it seemed like we were always spot on. We'd even get dreams about what the other was going to do the next day. Sometimes, it was very mundane. She got one and gave me a call while I was doing an internship at a police department and asked if I was doing something with hangers that day. I literally had a case file open in front of me where a man was attacked with a wire hanger. The most dramatic one being when I was 9 years old in 5th grade, and I dreamed she was in a car wreck. I remember all the details of it perfectly: the pouring rain, the way her Saturn hit water and she hydroplaned through a red light, lost control of the car, and swerved into oncoming traffic, where she collided head-on. Only, in my dream I saw a man with her in the passenger seat. I did not recognize him, and I remember thinking he looked German from his facial structure, white/blonde hair, and blue eyes. On impact, he put his hand into the air in front of my mother and felt like he created a bubble of protection. That's all I remember of the dream. When it happened the next day, my dad, my parents were divorced, came to pick me up at school to tell me my mother was in the hospital. I actually thought that I had caused it. I felt so guilty. When they took me to see her, I fainted after seeing the condition she was in. She wouldn't remember me until a couple of days later. But on one of my visits with her and my dad, while he was talking to the doctor and she was loaded up with morphine, she gave me a spaced-out smile and told me not to worry because she had someone watching over her at night. She described a blue-eyed man that floated over her bed. It freaked me right the hell out. When I was older, we would talk about this again and swear we saw the same person. Neither of us is religious, so I have no idea if it was a guardian angel, a shared hallucination, or what. She ended up healing remarkably well and is lucky to be able to walk to this day. Her wreck was in '97. I didn't really have any other memorable experiences until 2004, when I was 14 and living in my house, which I will refer to as B house because it's the first place I began experiencing creepy occurrences. I was lying in bed, and I had just woken up. I would frequently get sleep paralysis and exploding head syndrome, so I was used to weird things happening when I woke up. This time, I just woke up with this overwhelming sense of peace. I sat up to turn off my alarm on my phone, then lay back down, staring at the green curtains over my window. That's when they started to change. They were still my curtains, but suddenly there were images forming in them. An image of a beach and a child walking on the sand. There are fish flopping around at his feet, and he's picking them up. I realize anytime I try to focus too hard, the image fades, but if I stay relaxed and let my eyes do it for me, the picture becomes crystal clear. That was when a giant wall of water hit him, swallowing him whole. I knew he was dead. It shocked me to the core, and I sat straight up. That was the same day as the Boxing Day tsunami. I don't know if I had the vision before or after it actually happened, or if it was just a crazy coincidence. I'd go on to have many other dreams of natural disasters. Why natural disasters? Why not murders or other tragedies? Hell, why not just visions of kittens? When I was 18, my stepdad was renting out B house, the one I grew up in, and I decided I and my friends and boyfriend would move in and start college. Nothing important really happened for a while, and I started keeping a dream journal. Mostly it was just nonsense, and I lost interest. Except for one day about 4 or 5 years ago now, so when I was 20-ish, when I dreamed about my boyfriend's, now fiancé, mom having a dark smoke coming in and out of her chest. Weird, and I kinda wrote it off until I went over to their house the next day, and as soon as I entered the house I felt sick. Something smelled off. Dank, putrid. It was upsetting, and my boyfriend didn't smell it. Then I was overwhelmed with the feeling that it was her, and I just knew she was sick. I told my boyfriend, and we eventually, after much struggling, convinced her to go to the doctor. She was diagnosed with breast cancer later. You'll be happy to know she is doing fine now. All this to say, this could be a lot of things. It could be a severe case of confirmation bias, coincidences, or me being a little crazy. I'm not ruling any of it out. I suppose I could also be attuned to something else. Whatever that is. So back to B's house. When I was a kid, nothing ever really happened to me, though my mom always had stories. The only one I actually had any experience with was one night when it was just her, me, and my little sister, who was a baby at the time. She had one of those giant, maybe 4 feet tall, baby bottle banks, full to the brim with change. I could not have lifted it if I wanted to. I'm pretty sure my mother couldn't either, especially with her having such a bad back from her wreck. We both woke up one morning to find it right in the middle of the damn living room. I remember me and my mom both waking up at the same time, stepping out of our rooms, and bam, there it was. It gave me goosebumps, but it made my mom pissed. She didn't like it that something was doing this. Shortly after she began smudging, and I don't really ever remember any other incidents until I move in much later. One day my boyfriend and roommate are at work. They work for my boyfriend's family, as do I, and I come home after running errands. At this point in my life, I have 4 dogs, huge fenced-in backyard, and my world revolves around them. I walk in, throw my stuff down, and let the dogs into the house, and as we are walking down the hallway, talking to my dogs, I hear, quite loudly, mind you, a male voice hiss, "Shh." I freeze. My dogs freeze. The golden retriever's hair goes up and immediately starts growling. My first reaction was that a robber was in my house. Shit, shit, shit. I grabbed a Bowie knife hanging on the wall, very sharp. Christmas gift from the stepdad because he knows that my boyfriend and I like and train with weapons and martial arts, and I have since I was about 7. I immediately go room to room, knife at the ready, dogs with me while I call my boyfriend to tell him to call the cops if he doesn't hear from me. I check every inch of the house. Nothing. Dogs were starting to act calmer, so I decided not to call the police and lock myself in the back room with them and the knife. Just as I'm picking up my gaming controller to focus on something else, a loud bang, bang, bang thunders at the door to the room. I throw open the door, but there is nothing there. I take the dogs, and we bolt outside, where we end up waiting for everyone else to come home. Other people would say they felt weird things in the house, but no one else really had an experience like that one. That I know of. So after all that, here is where I finally get to the present. I live in another house now with the fiancé. We lived in an apartment before that and had no problems with weird activities. But this new house is a different story. It's secluded in the woods in a very rural part of Georgia. It is kind of a log cabin look to it and sits on about 6 acres of land. The house creaks and groans, and windows like to magically come open, but I chalked it up to it being an old house, wood expanding and receding from water or temperatures and pressure changes from the AC. Friends and I will get the willies there at night, and everyone seems spooked by the hallway, but nothing had really happened. Until one day about 7 months ago, when I was putting on my shoes in the living room. I get one shoe on and I hear a bang, bang, bang. I think it's probably the dogs jumping at the back door to be let in. I get up to go get onto them. I round the corner, walk through the kitchen, and see there are no dogs at the back door. Weird. I go back to putting on my other shoe when I hear it again. I round the corner and walk into the kitchen to see a cabinet door opening and closing again and again. I stood there watching it for a few minutes trying to figure out what could possibly be causing it. It wasn't under an air vent or anywhere near one. The other side of the cabinet was just drywall that bordered my living room. I got chills and grabbed my other shoe and bolted out of the house. Not more than a week after that, a burn mark appears on our wooden floor overnight. Fiancé and roommate confirmed that it was most definitely not there the day before, and we could find no explanation of how it got there. There had been no spills, no chemicals, no fire. About a week after that, I walk into the kitchen to see the dog's full glass water bowl skidding slowly across the floor. I update Facebook, explaining some of these experiences, and have a friend who tells me he is very attuned to the supernatural and wanted to come take a look at the house. I was pretty skeptical. Nothing really happened, he just said he could see shadows flitting out of the corner of his eye, especially near the kitchen and hallway. One night, I'm falling asleep when I hear a loud, knock, knock, knock. It sounded like it was coming from the back bedroom. I went to the living room and texted my roommate. Did you hear that? It happens again but louder, and he shoots out of his room, looking as scared as I felt. It seemed like it came from a separate place each time, and we couldn't quite pinpoint the location. I got a security system not long after that. Now all of that actually happened. The next part could just be a dream. In fact, I'm pretty sure it is, but I feel like throwing it out there just to add to the list of creepy occurrences. I wake up one morning in bed and see my dog's ears are up, looking at the vanity against my wall. That's when I see this very tiny gray creature scaling it. It moves so quickly and fluidly. It starts at the drawers and jumps up to the shelves and scurries over the top of it when it is lost from view. It kind of reminded me of the fairies and Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. That's really the best description I have of it. I realize it sounds ridiculous, it just seems so freaking real. So this brings me to last night. My golden retriever and I are sitting near the fireplace when I hear an odd, high-pitched whining noise. Kind of like a TV being turned on in the other room. I think it's just my ears popping or something, but I see Sammy, the dog, look up and put her ears up. She then starts darting all over the house, sniffing the walls and, looking at the ceiling, walls, and floors, just generally acting creeped out like maybe there was an animal in the wall. And there could very well be. I heard scrapes and scratches, starting in the living room, then the bathroom, and even my room. When I went to go to bed, Sammy pounced on the floor, looking under the bed and growling, hair on end, ears flat now. I look but see nothing, though I couldn't say it didn't freak me the duck out. She does this for a few more hours, I even got a recording of her doing it, but that doesn't really prove anything, just that I might have a retarded dog. She finally calms down, and we both get a couple of hours of sleep. We both wake up at dawn to this louder scratching in the walls. Could definitely be a mouse or squirrel. It was just really impressive how the sound would move from one location to another so quickly. I also had confirmation from my fiancé and roommate that they heard it too and were also creeped out by the behavior but assured me it's probably just an animal. So, yeah, this is a really long series of short stories and occurrences. I've had more odd experiences in my life, but I'll save that for another time. I honestly have no idea what I believe about what's going on. I'm open to any form of explanation. Usually the simplest is the truth, it's an animal, or I hallucinated things moving or whatnot, but I am curious to know what other explanations you guys might have. Thanks for taking the time to listen. Unexplained things have always kind of happened to me. Since I was a kid, I've experienced some kind of unexplained things. I've never actively considered them paranormal, just weird AF. The very first experience isn't actually my own, it's what my mother recollected to me. She's not a superstitious person herself, but she believes in following your instincts. I was a teenager, and we were talking about following your gut, and she told me that when I was a little baby, she was in my room rocking me to sleep, and she was suddenly totally overcome with this sensation that there was something awful outside my room. She said she remembered thinking that it was very important she just keep holding me, and so she rocked me through most of the night. I asked her why she didn't leave the room or call for my dad or whatever, and she said she felt calm and certain she just needed to stay with me. Maybe she's crazy, who knows? So anyway, my first personal unexplained event happened when I was probably about 9 or so, still young enough that I would yell for my parents if I got scared at night. Our house was brand new, we had had it built, so it wasn't an old, creaky house or anything. All of a sudden, right by my head, I hear this tapping. Like, not super loud but totally undeniably a tapping. It happened again, so I screamed for my dad, who came upstairs to see what was up, and of course I had to explain that my wall was tapping at me, and he was like, "Okay, you're fine, go back to sleep." So I stayed up most of the night, but it didn't happen again, and I don't remember ever hearing it after that. The next event was in the same house, but it is one of the hilariously mundane I mentioned. When I was about 14, I had a TV in my room, and I lost my remote. Finally, my mom helps me, and we clean my entire disaster of a bedroom. It's spotless, and still my damn remote is missing. So I chalk it up as gone forever, and I throw a little teen angst tantrum about it. I kind of have an overreacting issue. I'm on anxiety meds now, and in the middle of this tantrum, I look over, and the ducking remote is laying in the middle of the floor. The spotless floor. Super weird. My mom was like, "Yeah, I dunno, man," and we just kind of walked away creeped out. So nothing else of great significance happens after that. I mean, a few weird things here and there, but nothing notable. Flash forward about 12 years, and I'm living in this house with 4 other people. I'm living in the basement. So I'm doing laundry one day, and everyone was out of the house. I hear something upstairs, I pause to listen, and I realize it's someone walking through the house. I'm like, oh great. Roomies are home. So I call upstairs to say hi, and nobody responds. I wait a minute and go upstairs because I'm like, shit, did some creepy asshole just walk inside? Nope. Literally no one is home, but I know I heard someone come in. Scared the duck out of me. I refuse to be alone in the basement after that. Okay, so, a year later, all my roomies and I have to move. We moved out to this house in this tiny town, and, to be honest, it's a pretty creepy house. It has a huge unfinished basement. Now my roomies were convinced it was haunted, and they talked about all the spooky stuff that happened, but I was pretty skeptical, and I would always debunk it. But a few weird things happened that I can't explain. The spookiest thing is one night we were all playing board games and we started hearing a banging noise. It would bang a few times, not super loud but loud enough that we were all very obviously hearing it. And then it would stop, then start again a few minutes later. At first I thought it was the heat kicking on, but I turned the heat off and we kept hearing it. So then we walked through the whole house looking for the source and didn't find anything. We even walked the whole outside of the house just to see if something blew up against the house, and we never did find anything. The next place I lived alone with just my dog, also a basement, duck basements. Well, to be fair, my dog is terrified of everything. But one night she was just barking at this area on the carpet and wouldn't stop. She refused to go near it or walk through it. My solution was just to get drunk and go to sleep. And then the very last thing that has happened in the house I live in now. Again, hilariously mundane. I spent a ton of money on my dog and my cat's flea/tick/heartworm meds. So it's time to give it to them, and I can't find it anywhere. And to be fair, we had just moved, but I knew I packed it, and I remembered putting it somewhere in the kitchen. So, my boyfriend and I tear the place apart looking for these meds. It's a small house, there are only 2 closets. I looked in every single box, every single cabinet. I was unable to locate them. We actually looked for them together twice over about a week period. So finally I throw a temper tantrum, and I start crying and yelling about what a waste of money that is, just like little Miss Teen Angst did back in 2002, and I turn around, and the ducking meds are literally just chilling by where we keep our pens and stuff. Just sitting there out in the open. My BF and I were honestly both so weirded out because we both checked that area at least twice. I was like, duck this, let's leave the house for a bit. And then I called my mom and was like, remember the ducking remote? Shit's happening again. And she was like, yeah, I don't know, kid, I guess you're haunted. Shrug. Unknown presence. I'm pretty sure I may have encountered something. I've been hiking through forests all day, and I thought I saw something odd out of the corner of my eye earlier, but I figured it was a peaceful entity because I got no weird vibes, and I was walking peacefully and respectfully in the forest, but I'm staying in a little pension B&B type place, and I started feeling really off, and my general vibe was weird, so I wanted to reset by meditating in their garden. While looking at the stars and stating my wishes and goals during my mindfulness process, I start hearing what sounds to be a cat yowling, and I am one to always help an animal in need, but this yowling started to echo and sound really odd, almost distorted, and just really ducked up, so I immediately went back inside. What makes this even more creepy, which is why I came in here to get opinions rather than just move on from it and go to sleep, is that my mom, who I am here with, saw something earlier and yelled, "What the duck is that?" And said she saw a fox, mink, rat creature underneath the stop sign. She later described it as a cat but really low to the ground, but I live in the Czech Republic, and you don't really see minks around here. My brother and I were confused because we didn't see anything, and then she said, "Let me go up to it, maybe I can scare it," and keep in mind I think she is pretty in touch with good or negative omens. She's a powerful woman and won't take shit from anyone if she doesn't want them to, and she would never want to scare a random innocent creature, but I gather that her intuition told her that running up to it and scaring it away was the right thing to do because then she said it scurried into the bushes, supposedly. I never saw it or heard it. Another neighbor later asked us if we were looking for a cat, which means that this howling was the 3rd or 4th connection to something weird, so maybe when I was alone outside, this entity thought it could get my attention through howling and sounding like it was in pain. I don't know exactly, but I did know to come inside immediately because that howling was demonic, and I did not want to help whatever sound was coming from multiple directions. Opinions? My creepy encounters living in Elk City, Idaho. I can't help but think back to my childhood and see how insanely strange it all really was. As an actual child, it somehow never seemed very odd, but now looking back now it definitely does. Most of these were in the town of Elk City, Idaho, and some of these events seem very connected. It all started out when I was about 1.5 years old to 2 years old. I was smart for a young kid, my parents always said, and learned to talk at a very young age. My mom remembers me at that age crying and telling her that I didn't want to sleep in that room ever again because the Eskimo baby doll looked at me and nodded. She said I then proceeded to do a nodding motion. She removed the doll from my room, but it still exists in storage in my other house. She finds it specifically strange because I was super honest, and toddlers that young don't typically lie whatsoever. I seemed genuinely shocked and terrified. Next strange experiences were the dreams I had around this time period as well. Strange, vivid nightmares. People may say I could have gotten these dreams from watching scary movies or things like that, but it wasn't like that at all. I wasn't even allowed to watch Scooby-Doo till age 7. At that age I was carefully raised and overprotected with what I was allowed to watch. Mostly only Christian kids cartoons and Baby Einstein. These nightmares I got were very strange and ended up becoming a reoccurring theme throughout my childhood, with the same dream character tormenting me. The dream started with my mom dropping me off at some sort of party. There's a ton of kids there, and on stage is revealed to be someone in a creepy pig costume with eerie, lazy eyes and a smile. The figure was picking up children from across the room. My mom kept asking me if I wanted to go up and kiss the costume, but I refused to and felt a sickening fear and sense of impending doom all throughout me. Eventually she left, and I was forced to go up to the pig costume, but before I fully walked over, I stopped frozen and just stared. The longer I waited, the more it stared directly at me in a mocking way in the dark distance. It felt like pure evil. It just stared at me in a way that felt evil but with the same lifeless, lazy eyes and smile, and these words entered my mind. This thing's name, Miss Molly. I then woke up. I had this same dream nonstop my entire childhood with the same pig costume. Another dream involving the costume was my parents forcing me to go to a huge opera theater where she'd be on stage performing, the whole time me being the only one knowing something was bad wrong, and she always focused and dead on me. I even remember the smell in these dreams, and when I smelled the smell of an old steakhouse in town at night when I was older, I'd get instant flashbacks to the smell and feel of these dreams. Now that I know what animatronic restaurants were like, Pizza Time Theater, it seemed a lot like that in the dreams, though I had never even heard of such restaurants or been to one. I didn't even know what I was until I was in my teens. Around this same time as these dreams, my mom said I always would not go into my room and tried to stay out with her as much as possible, and when she asked why, I'd say, Jiffy is in my closet. I never explained to her what Jiffy was, however. More incidents after that, at around 3 to 4 years old, including me being terrorized by shadow hands. I remember staying at a hotel room during that time. I had just bought an electronic SpongeBob toy that talked when pressed on the hand, and I was sleeping with it that night. I remember it randomly talking without me pressing it, saying a phrase I hadn't heard before. This shocked me enough to throw it off the bed. Later that same night I heard knocking on the hotel window. I looked out, and through the curtain blinds, I saw the shadow of a long stretched up arm reaching up into my hotel window and making the devil horn sign with its hand. I remember I then hid under the covers the rest of the night and fell asleep. I would not have known what that symbol meant at that age. That same hotel I also remember having a painting that I avoided an entire bathroom over and would have to go to a bathroom outside of the hotel instead because it scared me so much. I remember nothing of what the painting was. Only the true horror it invoked in me and told me it wasn't safe to look at it. As I got older, 6 to 7, the paranormal events started back up a lot harder than ever. The shadow hands never went away, but now there was more. I started having more dreams of the pig costume that I dreamed of as a toddler but in different scenarios. I dreamed one dream that the pig costume lured me into my grandmother's barn where they were cooking and boiling people alive and torturing them in various ways, but this time there were many different costumes. I also dreamed I entered my grandmother's butcher house in the pure dark at night and saw the same pig costume, Miss Molly, on all fours, creepily sliding and crawling up to me in the dark silently but fast, its heavy, lazy eyes gleaming in the dark. For some reason I always knew the costume was hollow inside. There was always a sense there was no human inside the suit, like it was possessed. Another creepy costume-related dream I had involved me walking into my classroom where everyone was being very annoying, kids being gross and teasing me with snot and things. I left the classroom in the dream to find time had completely warped, and somehow, between walking in and out of the classroom 1 second later, the moment had changed to after school hours. I was locked inside the school, everything was dark, and it had been completely abandoned. I remember roaming the halls until I came across a tall, hollow duck costume in the distance. It had super long legs, and its long neck was bent backwards, staring directly at me from between its legs with huge black eyes. It said in a creepy voice, "I'm home," and then proceeded to come after me. I remember just curling into a ball on the floor, accepting death in the dream, and closing my eyes before waking up from it. I had way too many creepy costume dreams to count, but these are some of the most memorable. Besides dreams, creepy encounters when I was alive happened constantly. I remember I had a whirligig windmill toy that would spin and spin on its own at a certain time at night and a creepy tall giraffe toy I'd see blink at me. I also remember the strangest memory of my childhood, in which I woke up in the middle of the night to an entire scene being played on my curtains. It was like my curtains had turned into a movie theater screen playing some kind of vision. In this vision it showed a super destructive storm crashing everywhere, a huge sense of turmoil and panic, and a huge sailboat in the distance. On this sailboat was a puppet crying and screaming for help, looking at something in the distance on the huge ship deck he was lying on, coming closer and closer to him as crates crashed everywhere. I didn't want to see what happened next. Everything in me told me not to see what happened next. I tried to look away, but for everything that was dark from the night in my room, the scenes would begin playing on. Even when I closed my eyes, I wasn't safe from seeing the whole scene play out before my eyes. I've never heard of any other experience like this. I then ran to the living room. Eventually, on my way, the walls still playing the scene every time I glanced. I looked at the clock and specifically remember it being 7 a.m. and feeling safer knowing I wouldn't have to sleep for long. It then stopped. Never experienced anything that wild again, that is, until years later, when my grandmother went missing in our technology-deprived hillbilly town in Idaho, and we were woken up in the middle of the night to go help search for her. The night will always be one of the strangest I've ever had, or maybe the strangest. It's when I think I encountered some kind of demon. Everyone was searching for her, scared, and things, and I had to stay back at the camp with some relatives. I remember I saw this, I'll just call it a hallucination that seemed to look like the character Litao in Mario. He asked me if I wanted to make a contract with him and work for him. I accepted. I remember how real he talked to me, how he felt. It felt much realer than a mere imaginary friend or something of the likes. I acted as if I worked for him and did silly tasks for him, but time with him got stranger and stranger. This hallucination stayed with me far after the search party found my grandmother and we returned home. For a full year he stayed. The more he stayed, the more he started showing his darker side, revealing himself to be more manipulative and basically a huge jerk. The time when I realized I wanted him out of my life and he became worse and worse to me, I'll always remember because my mom said how I scared her during this time period when we stayed looking after a friend's house while he was away and how I didn't behave as usual. She even asked others for help because I was out of character, violent, and horrible. During this same period is when I remembered the Litao turning on me the most and showing himself more and more visibly all around me, not leaving me alone, laughing at me, mocking me. I remember the more he stayed, the more his friends appeared. They looked like demons. I remember there being a red one who felt female and had a strange sexual vibe to it that did overly disgusting acts I won't go into involving feces and other things. I remember once I was fed up with this Litao hallucination and the others with it and told him to leave me and never come back. I'll never forget seeing a stairway up to the sky appear and them running up it, cackling and laughing, screaming, and mocking me as they ascended. I never saw anything like it again. A similar encounter, however, happened when the pig costume nightmares came to an unexpected stop when I had a vivid dream in which a protective type creature entered the dream and told me I would never have to see Miss Molly again, but in order to never encounter her again, he would have to sacrifice his life for me, and I'd never see this good entity again either. I accepted this, and I dreamed a long battle that ended in him giving me a giant hammer and crushing a shrunken down version of the costume, killing it permanently. I remember how disturbing it felt to have all its bones and organs crush and pop underneath the hammer. The protector spirit then died. I never dreamed of the pig costume that haunted my dreams for years and years as a kid, ever since that dream, not even once, not even up until now. It actually worked somehow. Strange. Weird nightmares still persisted, though, and more paranormal incidents, too many to list, but some including me finding a Mario toy from the thrift shop that had creepy, depressing, heartbreaking vibes to it I can't explain. Even my dad said it felt creepy. I later on dreamed this toy belonged to a kid that had died in a mysterious way involving a manhole by the sewers, and in the dream I found the toy in a grocery store and began crying. The toy had his initials on it. I also remember encountering something very creepy while playing alone with the toy. In rural Idaho it was simple to get lost, and I remember playing in the forest alone with it far away from the house. The silence felt very eerie and depressing. I remember finding some kind of gross, flesh-looking substance on the ground filled with holes, which the dog I was with began trying to eat. My blood ran cold, and I felt to run and not look back, and I did. Later on, the dog's owner said she had also come back with a human finger bone from that same woods, if that could be related. It felt creepier knowing I brought that strange Mario toy with me during. The final creepy event I'll note here is my skinwalker type incident. I remember walking outside one night to let the dog out and seeing a giant, shaggy creature begin running around to the other side of the house where I was about to go. It looked like a dog but more in lengths of a human. Too big to be a dog and no sound strangely. I remember its carpet-like hair from what I saw. I got back inside immediately. Later on I had a vivid nightmare that I heard the sound of a baby crying outside the walls of my cabin, so I dropped to the floor and began crawling out of my room and to the bathroom for safety, but the baby crying noise continued crying and screaming and followed me to the bathroom from outside. Everywhere I crawled in the dream, it followed me all the way to the door. It wasn't a baby crying and following me outside the house. I knew in my heart it was something mimicking a baby, trying to lure me to go out there and open the door. I'll never forget how horrifying it felt. It doesn't help as well with the many other creepy encounters I've heard from the other people who lived in that same town of Elk City, Idaho. From UFO encounters, creepy life-haunting noises, demonic activity, etc. I also heard creepy whistling noises always sounding like they were trying to lure me into the woods. Saw a lot of things since I was allowed to play anywhere, even in the forests away from my house, but these are just my personal childhood experiences. I'd love to know your guys' thoughts on this, and I may share more encounters and dreams in the future. Additional information. I found out later on my parents have also experienced a lot of supernatural things, more than most in their life. My dad has been known to see a second set of eyes on people before finding out they've done something horrible. Not too long afterwards, my mom had an out-of-body experience during pregnancy in which she could move around out of body and see the others in the hospital and what they were saying before returning a while after, as well as other out-of-body events she has. I'm not sure if these kinds of things are genetic in any way. Also, the guy my dad saw the eyes on was someone who was a friend to our family and at our house a lot. I and he didn't interact much as I was very young, but he was visiting a lot. A little bit after that, my mom had a vivid nightmare in which the same guy stood over my bed and opened his mouth as it unhinged inhumanly, letting all this dark energy and evil into me. After this, our family stopped seeing the guy. It's strange because he was kind and never did anything bad to anyone or to me, but they just had a sense about him. He also had paranormal encounters in his past, as he claimed he had an alien abduction. It's strange how everything seems to be connected in a strange way. Some years ago I had a very weird encounter that I was never really able to explain. The strangest thing is that it did not only happen to me, but to a dear friend as well. I was in middle school. At the time I didn't have many friends, as I was a very shy kid. I was, however, lucky enough to meet one of my dearest friends, Dee. We used to hang out a lot, doing nerdy stuff and enjoying video games and fantasy movies. Notice I was bullied a lot in middle school, but Dee was always there for me. Over the months we established a profound connection, to the point that we understood each other without even speaking. During summer, Dee invited me to his house to play some new JRPG video game, Hoshigami. While we were playing, I remember we started telling each other scary stories that actually happened to us, for which we were not really able to provide an explanation. For me it was the first time I was able to speak so openly about paranormal facts that I experienced, and I believe it was the same for my friend. After many years I do not remember the stories, I just recall that we were getting more and more terrified as we kept going. Evening came, and I had to return home. Dee understood I was a little scared from the supernatural stories, so, being the awesome friend he is, he offered to walk with me to my house. Dee's home was an apartment on the 4th floor of an old building. It didn't have an elevator, but it had the room for it between the stairs. Also, there was an old, gigantic tree right in the front of the building, so the stairs outside of the apartments were always dark and cold. While Dee and I were walking down the stairs, we were talking about Hoshigami. Dee was trying to take my mind off of the scary stories. I felt a sense of danger right on my skin, as someone was about to lunge at me. As we kept going down, I was able to feel a sense of fear growing inside me, and my heart was racing for no reason. For a short moment I was paralyzed as I realized that there was a dark figure, floating in the space where the elevator was supposed to be. I can't really describe what I saw, I just remember it looked like a Nazgul from The Lord of the Rings. It was tall, pitch black, like it was made of darkness. I don't remember if it had wings or it was just floating, but it did have a weapon of some sort, also made of darkness. I remember that, despite the figure not having discernible eyes, I felt it staring at me. I believe he was ascending from the ground and moving up in the empty space between the stairs. After being paralyzed for a few moments, my body reacted on its own, and I found myself running for my life up the stairs. I wasn't able to look back. I sort of knew that if I stopped, I would have died. I only stopped myself when I was back in my friend's apartment, only to find out that he was right next to me, catching his breath while his face was as pale as snow. Once we could talk again, we spoke about what happened, and to my surprise, he described exactly what I saw. Dee also saw a dark figure floating in mid-air, sort of trying to reach out for us. He also felt an immense sense of danger and ran for his life. I had to wait a couple of hours before going out, and when I did, there was no one there. I was never able to fully understand what happened that day. We still talk about it, but the memory of it becomes less and less clear. Do you have any ideas about the entity we might have encountered that day? Was it merely a figment of imagination? I think something got my friend. Before I start retelling this particular experience, I want to preface it with my reason for sharing. This happened some years back, and I've always been quick to push it off and try and forget about it, but a conversation I had recently inspired me to write my story out so people with more experience of paranormal/supernatural phenomena might tell me what I witnessed, if anything. This all takes place in northwestern Montana during the late autumn of 2009. When I was 17, I moved out of my parents and in with a coworker, who I'll call John, in his trailer. We got along well at work, and we'd been part of the same weekly D&D group for a while. It was actually one of the better roommate situations I've ever had in terms of compatibility, and we became close friends during that time. We were roommates until shortly after I turned 18, and some personal stuff happened with my family. I ended up moving back in with them for a while so I could help them cover some bills. It took about 3 months for that situation to stabilize, and I called this friend up about moving back out there. This was the first time I remember feeling something was off, though it's been so long I can't remember the details of the conversation. Just a sense of wrongness that lingered for a while after I'd hung up the phone. The end result was that I was welcome to move back in, which I expected. I waited for a day off, and another friend, who I'll call Dave, came to help me move. Dave was another D&D pal from a different group, and we were figuring we'd show up and talk John into a one-shot session or something. So we loaded up all my stuff and drove out there, and it was a nightmare. From the moment John opened the door, everything was wrong. I won't say John was a clean freak, but he tried to maintain his space, and he'd always insisted we clean up for company when I was living with him. I stood there open-mouthed to see the thick layer of dust that coated nearly everything, and the longer I looked around, the worse it got. There was a half-eaten plate of food turned to mold sitting on the table, both sinks in the kitchen were similarly moldy, and the air in the trailer stank, even beyond what I'd expect for some moldy dishes. I was extremely taken aback by the state of the trailer, but the state of my friend was even more shocking. He worked at a bank and had always kept himself clean, but now he looked like a wreck. He'd lost weight, his skin had an unhealthy waxy look to it, his hair was overgrown and greasy, and his body odor was terrible. His smell is the first thing that makes me think there's something really off about the situation. I've been playing D&D and doing other nerd stuff for a long time, and I'm sorry to say a lot of nerds don't have the best hygiene practices. The short story is I've been in the presence of some pretty pungent body odor in my life, and this was not like that. It was almost the sickly sweet smell of something dead, but not quite. I've never smelled anything exactly like it, before or since. At this point during the encounter, I'm at a general level of unease, and I didn't have any desire to go into the trailer. But John invites us, and not wanting to be rude, I go in. At this point I'm thinking something crazy happened while I was away. John wasn't dating anyone, so I didn't figure this was a depression resulting from heartbreak, and we'd kept in touch okay after I first moved out, and even when that fell off a bit, I still heard from our mutual friends about the D&D sessions he was attending. Regardless, despite having not heard anything about it, obviously something had happened. So, standing there in his dusty living room with Dave, who is shooting me sideways looks the entire time, I ask John if everything is alright. After a full 3 seconds of silence, he assures me everything is fine. Just that, it doesn't try to explain the state of his house or anything, and weirder yet. He goes, "You guys can crash out here," and just heads off to the back of the house. I'd always known him to be a diligent host, so this was odd to say the least, although basically nothing was going as I expected or remembered up to this point. So him ditching us in the living room of his nasty house was maybe the least weird thing. Now comes the part where I'm pretty glad Dave was there. To me, this nasty trailer was my home. I'd lived there for more than a year before my 3-month visit to my parents, and I had a sense of belonging in the place, which I think made me oblivious to things that were obvious to Dave. Despite the state of things, and being left alone by my friend, I hadn't made any changes to the plan of living there. I set my stuff down and started getting ready to do some cleaning, but Dave stopped me and started pointing out things I hadn't noticed up to this point. The layer of dust was even and undisturbed across the entire living room and kitchen area except for the thin track from the front door to the hallway, leading to the back of the trailer. Whispering to me, Dave says, "Nothing in here has been used for a long time." And really looking around I realize he's right. The TV, the computer, the couch, and chairs. Dining table with its rotten food. He hasn't so much as laid a hand on any of it for a month, possibly longer. Dave, almost as if he's sneaking, walks quietly into the kitchen to inspect the fridge. He points out a few thick patches of dust on the flatter surfaces of the fridge, but it's harder to tell here. The fridge's metal handle had some dust, but it wasn't collected. Stepping past Dave, I reach out with one finger and pop the fridge open, and I am gagging before I'd even opened the door enough to trigger the interior light. Throwing my arm across my face and burying my nose in the crook of my elbow, I open the fridge about halfway, and it's top to bottom rotten food. I step back after a second, turning away and trying to suppress my urge to vomit. After I take a moment to collect myself, Dave draws my attention to a half gallon of milk he pulled out of the fridge, indicating that it had expired 3 weeks prior. Personally, I just wanted him to put everything back and close the fridge. More or less done playing dust detective. I basically shrug off everything up to this point, clear some dust from the couch, get my laptop out, and connect to the Wi-Fi. We'd always paid for the best internet available. After a while, Dave joins me, and we played World of Warcraft for a bit. Eventually he tells me he'll hang out for tonight, because I'm his ride, and taking him back to his place and driving back to the trailer was a 90-minute round trip. To be clear, I would have taken him home anyway. I wouldn't blame anyone for not wanting to hang out in a room with a giant stack of moldy dishes in the sink and a fridge full of rotten food. We played games on the computer for the next few hours, and John never made a noise. At one point, Dave asked me where the bathroom was, and I told him at the far end of the hallway, next to John's bedroom. A low level of unease had been present since John first answered the door and was becoming more apparent the longer we stayed. Normally I don't walk with my friends to the bathroom, but it seemed the right thing to do at the time. So I lead Dave down the hallway, flipping on the hallway light as we go and covering my fingers in dust from the switch. At this point I was actually starting to get annoyed with all of it. I don't normally have bad seasonal allergies, but all the dust we'd been stirring up had my nose itchy and half plugged. So on my way down the hallway, I think I'm going to point Dave into the bathroom and knock on John's bedroom door and confront him about the condition of the house, but halfway down the hallway I realize there's a hole in the floor outside the bathroom door. A jagged-edged hole through which you can clearly see the dirt, cobwebs, and shredded black plastic that used to cover insulation. A sigh, exasperated now with the weirdness. I point Dave into the bathroom and walk to the end of the hallway where John's room is. I wonder briefly if he's asleep, as there's no light coming from under his door. The sun was setting, but it gets dark pretty early this time of year. Annoyed, I knocked loudly, and after a few seconds I heard a grunt from inside the room. I pop the door open and flip on the light. This is the point in time where it really starts to sink in for me how wrong this experience has felt. I take in the room in a glance, and it's in much the same state as the rest of the house. Dust everywhere, except for the track from the door to the nearest side of the bed. The bed itself was terrible. The blankets and pillows were stained a deep yellow, almost black in places, and John just lay on his bed with a 1,000-yard stare turned on the ceiling. I forget entirely why I came to talk to John, because looking directly at him, I felt the beginnings of a profound fear, which even at the time seemed like an odd feeling to have in that situation. My sickly-looking, clearly depressed friend is lying on his disgusting bed, paying no attention to me at all. John was not an intimidating guy, short, kinda chubby, and baby-faced, but in my gut I was afraid of him. I mumbled something about how I'd come to say goodnight, turned off the light, and shut the door. I turned around to find Dave kneeling by the hole in the floor, which, as I write this, makes me wonder how long I stood in the doorway to John's room. If I had to estimate, from where I left Dave to saying goodnight to John, only 15 seconds or so elapsed, yet he was already out of the bathroom. As I approach, Dave points at the edge of the hole and tells me the wood along the edge is twisted upward, as if the hole was made from below. This part, I wish I could confirm to be true. I'm including it in my retelling of events because Dave did say it to me, but I did not take the time to inspect the edge of the hole myself. Right then I was at war with my own sense of fear that being in John's presence had sparked. I just nodded to Dave and said, "We should get back to the living room." Fast forwarding a bit, I kind of came to my senses once we were back in the living room area and I had reopened my laptop. My sudden intense fear of John eased off, and we played games for a few more hours before Dave said he wanted to rest his eyes. We shut everything down. I chilled out in a recliner, and Dave lay down on the couch. Dave positioned himself so he could gaze down the hallway. I was too uneasy to sleep overall. After looking into John's room, I had determined I wouldn't be living here after all. As much as I really didn't like living with my parents anymore, it was preferable to whatever John had going on. Quietly I told Dave that everything was all wrong and explained a bit how John, as I knew him, would never let anything get to this point. We weighed out the possibilities, a psychotic break or maybe drugs. Recently, it dawned on me that perhaps he was seriously ill. These are all still possible explanations for his strange behavior, but my gut tells me none of these are the answer. After a while we lapse into silence, and at this point I'm just waiting for the sun to come up, really starting to wonder why we haven't left already when Dave motions with his hand to get my attention. He kind of points towards the hallway, and I turn my head slowly in the recliner to look, and after perhaps 15 or so seconds of staring hard into the darkened hallway, I hear a slight creak from the darkness. A little while and a few creaks later, I see John's darkened silhouette standing just inside the hallway at the edge of the kitchen, and that deep sense of fear started to build in me again. The only thing I can compare it to is once when out hiking alone, I ran right into a bear going the opposite way on the trail. I had bear spray on me, which I didn't end up using that time, but it was a terrifying experience, and if I'm being honest, I've never really enjoyed hiking much since. Just standing across from that monster of a bear with nothing between us awakened a terror in me so deep-seated that recalling the memory still gives me goosebumps. Alternatively, I've been face to face with a lot of crazy people and felt no terror. I wasn't fearless when trying to avoid a knife-wielding transient shouting gibberish at me, but it was a human threat, if that makes sense. I realize I've segued pretty hard for my retelling of events, but I feel making this clear is paramount. Seeing John lurking in the darkness of that hallway inspired in me a state of fear so powerful I feel I have no choice but to look for unconventional answers as to what happened to my friend. Because the only thing comparable to that gut feeling of dread my short, chubby, baby-faced friend created in me was the time I ran into one of the largest terrestrial predators on the planet, by myself, on his home turf, far and away from any help, armed with nothing but a can of bear spray. There was something wrong and dangerous going on that I can't justify analytically, but my instincts told me I was in danger in a way I'd never been prepared for. To fast forward this story to the end. We lay there in silence while he lurked in the hallway for hours. When I questioned Dave recently, he told me it was at least 2 hours. John stood there. Eventually, he crept back down the hallway to his bedroom, and quietly and quickly, we got our shit together, sneaked out to my car, and left. I did a little bit of follow-up with our mutual friends afterward but got the same story from all of them. One day he just stopped coming around. Later I heard from someone who spoke to his parents that he called them and said he was leaving town, and no one that I know has seen or heard from him since. I've mostly tried to forget it all happened. For a while, I'd have panic attacks when I thought about it. I realize nothing overtly paranormal took place, so I'm sorry if this is shared in the wrong place, but my gut tells me that something well out of the ordinary was taking place. If anyone has any insight, I'd be happy to hear it, and if you need more details, I'll answer questions to the best of my ability, and if you don't believe me, I don't blame you.